Ethan. All right. Out of respect for your time, I think we'll get started. Thank you so much for coming out on a late Sunday afternoon. I know it's not a particularly a great time to want to go do something such as this to prepare for Monday morning. Let me start by introducing myself. I know probably most of you, but my name's Craig Howry, and I'm a member of a McFarland family. We moved out here from the east side of Madison, 1968. I graduated in 1971. And since that time, we've had 11 graduates, and we have 3 currently in school. And my father, Jim, was a board member in the early 80s. But I want to start tonight by telling you that our school board, administration, and all district staff believe, or with the exception of very few, we believe that the fact that someone voted no in the first referendum, that does not mean that they don't support our school district. We understand that. What we need to do is find that spot where we can produce a product that's satisfactory to you at a cost you can afford. We don't think that our community supports the school district and public education in general. We know that we have their support. We simply need to determine at this time what is the community's fiscal tolerance level. Tonight, I'll just lay out some of the things that we intend for tonight. Tonight's focus is first sharing some foundational information about the financial situation of the district. Then sharing the results of the referendum survey, followed by answering your questions and getting additional feedback, hopefully. We want to be clear that the board has made no decision regarding a second referendum. We know that there was a lack of community engagement prior to the April 2nd referendum question being decided, with some community members wishing there were more opportunity for discussion and changes to the proposal before it was finalized, and others being unaware of a referendum at all. We are committed to doing things differently. The survey results and any other feedback you share inform the board as we try to find a solution that meets the needs of our students, our taxpayers, and our community. We are so grateful to you for your willingness to work with us at this incredibly important time for our students and our community. At this point, I think I'll introduce our superintendent, Aaron Tarnitzer, and he'll give you more detail on what's going on. Aaron, thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Hello, my name is Aaron Tarnitzer. I get to be the superintendent here in McFarland. I have served this school district. This was the start of my 18th year, 15 years at the middle school as an associate principal and principal, and this is my 3rd year here as the superintendent. I'm very proud to serve this community. Tonight, I will serve as more of a host MC. I will talk a bit, but you're going to hear more from some other people. Before I get into that, I do want to recognize some special guests or special honorees that we have in attendance. First of all, we have our school board members. So you just heard from our board president, Craig Howry. We also have Bruce Fisher, who is here with us, Megan Fessler, and Tom Mooney. If you could just stand up and give a wave to everybody. Can't be anonymous in this place. There you are. Thank you so much for being here. We also are pleased and privileged to have your very own McFarland Village President, Carolyn Clow, who is here today. She and Matt Schinke, the village administrator, was here on Wednesday. Want to make it clear that after the meeting, they're happy to answer any questions you may have and talk about village-related issues as well. So thank you for that partnership. It really means a lot that you're here tonight. And then we do have some very special people that are going to be really running the show here tonight. And so as I'm talking, if we could just have our referendum engagement group members, if you're in the audience, if you could just come up front and be recognized. And one of your members, Todd, is going to tell you a little bit about the referendum engagement group. So we're going to hear from him now. Thank you. Come on up.
Thank you, Aaron, and good evening, everyone. While we get our group all assembled up here, I'll just do a quick introduction. My name is Todd Pritchard. I'm just a dad, but I wanted to say one thing really important off the top, and that's thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. We're so grateful that you took the time to be with us tonight. Those of you who are joining us on the live stream, thank you for watching. We want to have you ask questions. We want to get answers to you. We want to have you gain insights and share your thoughts about the district's financial situation. I'd like to talk about the important work that the McFarland School District's Referendum Engagement Group put in on this. And you can see, obviously, some of our members up here. This group was created as a first step to collaborate with the community following the defeat of the April 2nd referendum. It consists of 28 members, so a bunch of us are here tonight, and it included both supporters and opponents of the previous referendum. Many in the group have had generations of family members graduate from McFarland. Others, like myself, my wife Lisa, we moved here so our son Sean could have a great education. We came here from Hawaii, and where public schools are ranked 49th out of the 50 states in the District of Columbia. And that, frankly, is just not an environment that we wanted Sean to grow up in. Wisconsin, on the other hand, is ranked 5th, with McFarland earning the second highest district report card in Dane County. And I think that is a true testament to this community's culture and to the commitment to public schools. As Craig mentioned just a little while ago, our group's shared goal is to find what some of the members are calling the sweet spot. What is the solution that this community, the students, and the district staff can support and is attainable? So this group had 4 main objectives. 1, understanding why the previous referendum didn't pass. 2nd, analyzing the funds needed for the school district. 3rd, identifying the potential budget cuts and revenue increases, and exploring the possibility of a revised referendum in November. So why didn't the referendum pass? For a majority of voters, it was just a bridge too far. It was too much money over too much time. We all know that family budgets are under incredible pressure. Many felt that they were on inflation overload. And as Craig mentioned, there was a lack of community engagement. Some folks wanted more discussion, more options, more information about the referendum before it was finalized. Some folks didn't even know there was a referendum on the ballot. And there was even an internet rumor, misinformation flying around about the possibility of misappropriation of funds, which is just not true. So tonight, the district, our engagement group, we're going to share important facts and information about the district's needs and the funding trade-offs. This engagement group is really an impressive group of folks. It's been my honor to work with them, to learn from them, and to help develop the referendum options that were on the survey that you received a few weeks ago. It's all about trying to find that common ground, and that's what we're here tonight for. So in closing, I want to emphasize just one really important thing. This is all about community involvement, and tonight it's all about you, answering your questions, getting your input. And the discussion we have tonight will really help shape the future of our schools, our children, and our community. Thank you.
Thank you, group members. Really appreciate you. Also, I missed one special recognition of someone in the crowd that we need to recognize. We have also, in addition to our president, Clow, we also have a village trustee. So Luke Fessler is here. So he's right up front because he wants to get all the information right there. We got you, Luke. So thank you for being here. As we transition, there's one thing I did want to point out to you is some of the handouts that you received, and those at home. You can see all of those in our website. All of those are included. One of them, for those that are in person, is this blue slip of paper, and that will be your exit slip. You will not be able to leave unless you fill this out. Okay, that's a joke. Thanks for laughing. But it does provide us with some information about what you learned, advice for us, additional feedback for us. Very important. If you are also in person and would like to fill it out online, you can do that instead in case you have to run. You also have this key points document, and that was our way to kind of give you a handout so you can leave with something. I made some quick changes to it today, one of which was to make a typo. So if you see a spot that says that state funding has kept up with inflation, that's not true. It has not kept up with inflation. So for those of you at home, that's been corrected, but that's an embarrassing start to this meeting that I have to do, and now I feel less guilty. But so next, we are going to transition into giving you some foundational knowledge about school funding in Wisconsin and in the McFarland School District. So one of our group members, Melanie, is going to share about that.
And there's a lot up there. I'm going to talk about all of it, so don't even, I mean, you can read it, but you don't have to. All right, so my name is Melanie Roback. I'm a parent of 2 kids in the McFarland School District. I've been in math education for about 23 years, with over half of that time in the classroom teaching middle and high school math. I'm still teaching, but not in the schools full-time right now, not in the McFarland School District. I'll just quickly note, and probably a lot of you know him, we have a gentleman named Al Rundy who is part of our referendum engagement group, who presented this portion on Wednesday night. He has worked for the State of Wisconsin Legislative Fiscal Bureau for about 30 years. They provide all of the data, research, information to legislators on a nonpartisan basis. So he knows all about school funding in Wisconsin and has been a huge resource to all of us, educating us in the group. And now I get to fill his shoes. Anyway, you should not hesitate to reach out to him. He's always happy to walk people through school financing. I'll also just say that I'm presenting all of this without the district's own funding expert present tonight. That's Jeff Mahoney, the business manager who has all this down to a T. If you like this kind of stuff, Jeff Mahoney just walked through all the main pieces of the school's financing in far more detail than you'll see right here. And the budget for next year at the last school board meeting on July 15th, and you can watch that recording online. And for those of you who don't know, you can watch any village or board meeting remotely online as it's happening or later on. Anyway, with that, school funding. How did we get here? It's important to understand how school funding works in the state of Wisconsin. A 1993 state law set limits on how much of our property taxes can go to our schools. It's called the revenue limit, and here's how it works. The state sets the amount per student for a standard education, and $11,000 per student is like the state's minimum wage for funding school districts. In McFarland, we get a little more. Here, I need to hide, this is too high. We get a little more, we get about, oh, how's that? All right, Thank you, sorry. We get about $12,000, just a little bit over $12,000 per student. This, by the way, the reason we get a little more is because we passed a referendum way back in 2004 to raise our revenue limit on a recurring basis. This amount ultimately determines our district's revenue limit, or the cap on funds for operational expenses. And so this, for us, this is what we get. And there's a cap, right? And it's roughly, the cap for us is $34.2 million when you include everything like state aid and grants. This $34.2 million is the most we can collect in property taxes to fund our day-to-day expenses, operations, from heating, insurance, and buses to paying staff. And just to note how this money is used, staffing, about 77%, combined with other district services like 4K teachers and subs, accounts for 83% of the budget of this amount. Most of the rest of the budget is fixed costs with very little wiggle room for cutting. Things like insurance, technology, hardware, utilities. You think of things you'd also have in a normal household, like electricity, water, internet, but this household is just about 1 million square feet. The cap can increase only two ways. One, the state provides an adjustment, usually for inflation. Or two, voters approve a referendum to raise a cap. But over a decade ago, the state adopted a new policy and stopped their annual adjustments for inflation. So this is supposed to cover our school's basic operational costs, but it doesn't account for inflation. This one, oh my gosh, this one does. And it's roughly $38 million. I have it on here, $37.9 million, giving rise to a funding gap. You can see that gap with my quivering muscles, that every school district in the state has to contend with, and leaving it to them to make up the difference or not through local referendums. Operational referendums are the only way for schools to raise the cap, even if only to adjust for inflation. So schools try to work within it, but since 2019, we've seen the highest rate of inflation in 40 years. Ooh, do I control this? Oh, there we go. You control it, okay. This is not unique to McFarland, which is why the vast majority of Wisconsin school districts, 86%, have gone to referendum to cover day-to-day expenses, and over 80% of districts have pursued referendums at least twice since the state stopped its annual inflationary adjustments over a decade ago. In Dane County, McFarland is the only, oh, I'm sorry, my apologies. So when you look at this graph, you can see the difference between where we are and where inflation would take the cost of education. Now, federal COVID money helped fill things in. That's what the state told districts to do. The state is aware that schools are underfunded, and they directed districts to use these one-time funds to address their budget shortfalls and their ability to cover regular expenses, while record inflation sort of bloomed in the background. Also known as ESSER funds, these one-time federal funds are not subject to the cap. They provide extra on top, okay? So you can see that here. The yellow in the graph is kind of like this, okay? And then the red, the ESSER funds, the COVID money, filled in the gap against the blue, our actual expenses and, what we need. With careful planning over 3 years, the $6 million in COVID money gave the district the bigger jar that they already needed before COVID, also delaying their need to go to referendum. I'll note something about fiscal responsibility later, but our district was actually able to make this money last longer than other districts around us were able to do. And the last 3.1 million of it allowed us to keep 31 teaching positions this past school year. With that critical boost of COVID money gone this year and no changes to the state's school funding model, the district now faces a fiscal cliff, like many districts around the state that did not recently pass operational referendums to prepare and sort of soften the blow. That's what our April referendum was about. The purpose was to make a long overdue inflation adjustment so that we can keep our staff and stay competitive. It's difficult to attract and retain teachers with below average salaries during an increasingly dire teacher shortage. At this time, we have the second lowest per pupil amount of any district in the county. And we're about 9th and 10th out of 12 on teacher pay. Why? Because as I said, all other districts in Dane County have passed operational referendums to raise their revenue limits. For example, our revenue limit is about 20% below the limits of Monona Grove and Oregon. We are the last one. Okay, so one last piece to understand, state aid. This capped amount for day-to-day expenses comes almost exclusively from two revenue sources, state aid and property taxes. If you look up your tax bill for the past 5 years on Access Dane on the website, or pull out your tax bills, you will see that the school portion of your property taxes went down almost every year from 2018 to 2023, and it's expected to go down again, even as property values and your overall tax bill keep going up. This is because of state aid. So state aid is designed to lower property taxes. That's what it's there to do. It does not raise the cap on our school funding or add to the total sum. Here's my state aid. Here's my state aid, all right? It doesn't go up here, okay? It goes inside, and the revenue cap, right, minus the state aid that goes in is what the taxpayers cover, okay? And when state aid goes up, as the new July estimate predicts that it will for this October, then taxpayers contribute less. Look at this. State aid goes in.
They're pretty excited.
In this case, they estimate that $100 savings in year one could appear in year one of all the surveyed options, or just, in the next year due to the estimate that came out in July, but that's not firm. And our rising property taxes have provided increased revenue for other taxing entities like the village and the county, but not for the schools. And before I summarize and turn it over on top of these challenges, just a quick note about fiscal responsibility and frankly, what is arguably a strength of this district, I've learned. You can go online. There's a fairly extensive list of strategic steps to cut costs without compromising quality. And for context, we have to remember, we've heard some of this already, that we have almost the lowest teacher pay and per pupil funding in Dane County, but our district report card ranks us as the #2 school district in Dane. And we have exceptional teacher retention, 95%. So we're leveraging our resources. There's a long list, but a couple of examples. Despite growing funding challenges, they transitioned from a habit of short-term borrowing in 2018 which is costly, to building up a little bit of an interest earning surplus in their main fund balance. This past year, the interest was $450,000. I misquoted on Wednesday, incorrectly said 400,000. It's even more, which goes right back into the budget, funding the equivalent of 6 or 7 teachers. Because of our $2.4 million deficit for this coming school year, we'll dig into this balance, and the interest is projected to drop to about $200,000. Second, it's a source of pride for the school board and district, their intentional effort to keep our administration smaller. It's not top-heavy, it's the opposite. It's a smaller than average team compared to districts of similar size and need, and they've done that on purpose. It's 13 positions total, including 4 principals and 9 assistant principals. 4 principals and 5 assistant principals. And they each wear more hats because, unlike most districts, we don't have a dedicated human resources director or a dedicated communications director or a dedicated technology director. All of these roles are kind of split up. It's about 20 to 23 director positions, and then another handful of coordinator roles, all spread out between them. And many of whom earn below average salaries themselves, and then as a result of the failed referendum, recently volunteered $49,000 in pay freezes or cuts to their raises. They'll be fine, of course, but we know that there are market forces that make other districts more attractive. And it's too much to tack on here, but noting the capital referendum in 2016 to improve facilities, that's a separate funding bucket, taking on a different set of expenses and needs. They have a lot of information on the website, but I'll just note, for example, the pool renovations. In 2023, the pool served 21,000 more people than in 2016. 21,000 more people, and hosted events benefiting local businesses. 21,000 is more than twice the population of McFarland. And otherwise, just say that along with all other measures of this district's fiscal responsibility, there are just several indicators that this was a responsible expense to take on at a responsible time. Summarizing the biggest challenges, a revenue limit that does not keep pace with inflation as part of a school funding model that is designed to make schools close their own gaps by asking voters to approve tax raises. 2, the loss of one-time funds, COVID money, that temporarily obscured a growing funding gap that has impacted every district in the state. 3, the need for competitive pay in a teacher shortage. And ultimately, the budget is about paying staff. Caitlin is going to tell you more about that.
Good evening. I will introduce myself. My name is Caitlin Howen. Thanks for coming tonight. I am a homeowner in McFarland for the past 8 years. I'm a taxpayer. I have 2 kids in the elementary school. And as a profession, I am a compensation consultant. So I help organizations across the country manage pay for their staff in many different industries. So I look at compensation and wages and think about the economics of the labor market all day long. So I joined the referendum engagement group after the failed referendum because I thought that I had a knowledge base in a specific area that could impact the school district. So I've been, really excited to learn more about the district's needs and also, try and contribute what I can to think about solutions for the district. Something also about me that I don't think I shared with the engagement group prior to our convening was that I didn't even know that there was a referendum on the ballot until I showed up at the municipal center that day. So I was kind of blindsided by it, and hence the results seemed interesting to me also because this community has historically supported our schools with their financial vote of yes. So I really thought it was time to get involved. So just like Melanie said, today I will talk about what I do on a daily basis for my profession in the context of the McFarland School District. I'm going to speak slowly, hopefully louder than I did on Wednesday, and hopefully in plain language. Compensation is a very complex thing for an organization. If you have questions afterwards, I'm happy to answer them. If I don't know the answer, I'm happy to find out and send you an email afterwards. So please don't be shy. So in addition to the state funding issue that Melanie mentioned, it's getting harder and harder to attract and keep high-quality staff. There is a teacher shortage because fewer people entering the field of education, fewer people enter the field of education from college, and also because teachers often take different jobs only after a few years of working in education. That might be a result of finding something that pays more, that is related to their role, or maybe possibly something that works for their schedule a little bit differently. There are many reasons, but the result is that we don't have enough teachers, and that is a nationwide problem, not specific to McFarland or Wisconsin. Keep in mind, like Melanie said, McFarland is the last school district in Dane County to not have a passed referendum to help with operating costs to pay for normal expenses, like salaries for staff. So this means that all other Dane County districts have acknowledged that they need to increase teacher pay and have asked their community to pass a referendum, and they successfully received that support. Their pay for their staff will increase soon, if it hasn't already. So because of this, we now need to increase salaries to make sure our jobs keep up and pay a wage that maintains competitiveness with our neighbors. We know that staff might be looking for other jobs in not just different districts, but also in different industries that have transferable skills. And we need to pay competitively in our area to compete with other places that teachers might be able to go. These details, in summary, all mean that employee pay is really a basic economic fundamental issue of supply and demand. So we know that there is a teacher shortage, which means that the supply has gone down for that commodity or resource that we need. And when the supply of a resource goes down, the demand typically goes up, resulting in higher costs or needing to pay more money for a specific product, a specific service, etc. Some similarities that you can possibly remember or relate to in history is butter and sugar in World War II or toilet paper in COVID. Those are things that had a lower supply, therefore demand was high, and we saw an increase in cost for that specific good. So we must pay a higher wage for teachers to get teachers to not only stay in our district and not go elsewhere, but also to attract a new teacher when there becomes a vacancy. If a teacher leaves, there's also a monetary cost to replacing that teacher. And the cost well outpaces the actual earnings of that teacher if they were just to stay in the district. So with the needed training and the costs of recruitment, a data point for general industry jobs is that it costs 150% of an employee's annualized salary to replace that employee in order for them to be on board and efficient in the same capacity that that prior employee in that position was. So it's more fiscally responsible to retain the staff that you have as opposed to finding new staff to replace. Just as importantly to the monetary costs of having an employee leave, it influences morale and the relationships that a staff member has built over time with their colleagues, the community, and our kids. Kids thrive on structure, and it makes them feel safe and more able to learn when staff are consistent, and there's a friendly face in the morning to greet them and create a space of learning that is positive. So Melanie told you a little bit about teacher pay and how we are hovering towards the bottom. Right now, the McFarland School District entry pay rate for a new teacher is slightly below average when compared to our other districts that we compete with. But remember, these schools have just passed a referendum, which means that they will be increasing their pay soon. So we will continue to fall lower and lower on that list until we are no longer maintaining competitiveness with that entry pay rate for staff. So as we continue to not be able to keep up, that gap's going to continue to increase over time. And once an organization, whether it's a school district or any business, is behind in pay, it is increasingly more difficult to then get to maintain competitiveness once more. That doesn't mean lead the market, it just means maintain and be in the general ballpark of what others are paying for that specific profession. Also, something to keep in mind when we talk about teacher salary and competitive wages is part of an employee's pay or compensation is usually not just their paycheck, it's also the benefits that their employer provides that they receive as a result of being an employee. And the cost of offering those benefits, primarily health insurance, has increased with inflation over time too. So we need to not only maintain competitiveness with our base pay, but we also need to be offering benefits that are also competitive with our peers or our competitors as well. And we need money in order to do that. So finally, as a compensation professional, it's a significant cost to any organization to lose good staff. And it's often much more, like I said, than just the regular rate of pay. So the district is known for high quality teachers, and we want to keep them not only because they're great at their job, but also because it's a fiscally responsible strategy of an organization in order to move forward and be successful overall. So thank you for your time, much appreciated. I will be turning it over to Megan Fessler, I believe, to talk about the April referendum and the challenges as a result. So thank you.
All right, I think Caitlin and I are about the same height, so I get to leave the microphone this way. Thank you for all of that. So I'll introduce myself a little bit too. I'm Megan Fessler. I'm just rounding out my second year as a school board member. I have 2 kids in the district, both high schoolers. I'm a certified public accountant, have been playing with numbers for about 20 years now. That makes me feel a little old, but that's where I am in life. And I also work in McFarland at a local business, and so I basically live, work, and play in our lovely community. And we love McFarland, and so I'm passionate about public education, and I'm really happy to be here with all of you tonight because you being here means that this is also important to you. So thank you for that. You know, Melanie and Caitlin spoke a lot about the challenges that we've faced as a district, and we responded to those challenges by asking voters to approve the operational referendum in April. As you know, that referendum failed by about 60% to 40%. And we really respect and acknowledge the community's decision. I mean, that's part of our job, is to take this information we get and use it to inform our decisions going forward. Some of the main reasons and themes that we've heard about why it failed includes too much overall money for too long of a time period at a time when people are struggling due to other increased expenses. The inflation that Melanie talked about, that's not just hitting schools, it's hitting all of us, right? I'm sure you all can feel that. Lack of community engagement prior to the referendum question being decided and feeling it was all or none. Feeling that the district needs to make cuts before asking for money. Confusion about school funding, our budget, and the tax impact. I'm an accountant, and it was confusing to me. So people who aren't numbers people, I really sympathize with that. And we're really hoping that tonight and some of the other resources, the Q&A on our website, can help people understand, you know, where we are and why. The last one that was a major theme, lack of clarity on how the money would be spent. And we want you to know that we heard you and that we continue to hear you. This is really, really important to us that we get your feedback, and anything that's going to help us inform our decisions going forward is really important to us. In addition to our efforts to engage the community, we also want you to know about some of the things that we've done to decrease our expenses since the failed referendum. So I am going to introduce Kelly Thompson, one of our amazing educators and also community member, to tell you more about these efforts.
Perfect height. Don't have to change it at all. Good evening. My name's Kelly Thompson, and as Megan said, I am a community member of McFarland since, I believe, 2010. I'm also a homeowner and a taxpayer. I bought my home in 2013. I live on a street not far from here. It's a really small street. And when I moved in, there were actually, of the 5 houses on the street, 3 of the 5 were families of students that I have taught in the district. I'm also a district school teacher. I just completed my 25th year of teaching in McFarland and my 27th year of teaching overall. So been here quite a while. On Wednesday evening, Angie Bazan spoke about this piece that I'm about to touch on. Many of you may know her. She also is a teacher here at the high school, and was a McFarland High School graduate, actually. Finally, I have had the opportunity to experience the district as a parent. My daughter, who is in the audience this evening, went through the district K-12 and is a 2023 graduate of McFarland High School. I'm very proud to say that she is in college currently studying to become an educator herself, so exciting. After the referendum did not pass in April, the district went right to work to look very closely at our expenditures and areas in which we could make cuts, pause, or make other adjustments to impact the budget shortfall for the 24-25 school year. Through the collaboration of the school board staff and the referendum engagement group, the district made over $1.2 million in budget cuts. As a district employee, I will say that this was a very collaborative process. Staff definitely had input into the process. There was a committee of staff members across the district. There were surveys and so forth. So very much a collaborative process in looking at the cuts that would be made. First, the district reduced staffing, saving about $700,000. The district did that by not filling positions that were open when staff left. That includes elementary school teaching positions, special education teachers, education assistants, and library staff. In some cases, this meant that teachers who were teaching one grade level moved to another grade level where they're learning a new curriculum and a new age group. As a high school teacher, I have actually only ever taught 8th grade and above my entire 27 years. I can tell you that, say, teaching 2nd or 3rd grade would be quite a, different experience. So changing grade levels isn't, an easy thing. That is a challenge. In other cases, this meant that some staff took on additional responsibilities that would have been covered by a staff position that was cut. Second, the district reduced other budgets, saving about $500,000. As I mentioned earlier, there was a staff group that helped make these decisions. That resulted also in a 10% cut across budgets. This involved a variety of things, such as raising student fees, reducing supply budgets, and reducing technology. Last, $49,000 was saved through reduced administrator pay increases, including some administrators having no increase. While one of the goals of budget reductions was to minimize the impact on students, we know that it is impossible to make cuts of this magnitude without some impact on students and, of course, on staff. Even with the $1.2 million in cuts, we still have a budget deficit of $2.5 million for next year, and this will get bigger as expenses increase. The district remains committed to continuing to look for other ways to save money and increase revenue. Before we move on to our next speaker, I want to share some thoughts on behalf of our teachers. We want you to know how much we appreciate your support for us. We take our jobs very seriously and can be our own hardest critics, but we keep coming back due to our commitment to the students in the community. In the 25 years I've been in the district, I have had some phenomenal colleagues, from ones that I taught with 25, 24, 23 years ago to ones that I'm working with currently. You know, teachers really support all that you as the community support. Sometimes that's classroom projects. Sometimes that is musical events or athletic events. Clubs often do fundraisers or have public events. Some people, you know, volunteer in our schools as classroom volunteers, hugely appreciated. And of course, supplies and, you know, treats, things like that. We teachers very much appreciate and know that the community supports our students. I grew up in a small town about 20 miles from here, Evansville. And McFarland is a little bit bigger now than Evansville is, but both in growing up and as a teacher in this community, I really understand how schools can be the heart of the community. And I think that is an aspect of really high value. So I think, you know, it's something to really appreciate about McFarland. Many times, staff participate in graduation. If you've been to high school graduation recently, it's really something special as a teacher, whether a teacher had that student in first grade or in middle school, which can be an interesting time for kids, or in high school, the last 4 years. It is an amazing experience to watch students that you've worked with walk across the stage and get their diploma. Just incredibly special. And knowing that we have had an impact on them, whether they become business owners or police officers or accountants or nurses or teachers, that's a really profound impact that I am really appreciative of in my career. We also know that, and I mentioned also that there are many McFarland staff that live in the community, that are homeowners, that are your neighbors, that are your friends, and so forth. So there are a fair number of us that live here as well. We do know also that any cut we make will impact student learning. We're hopeful that we can continue to provide high-quality instruction that the students deserve and provide working conditions that bring staff here and keep them here. That continuity is important to kids. Relationships are really the heart of education. The relationships that staff have with students and staff amongst ourselves as well is really crucial. So that's a really valuable thing to provide for kids. So next up, we are going to hear from a former student of mine, Samantha Zylenga, and also Bruce Fisher, who is on the school board, also a former colleague of mine at McFarland High School. Thanks so much.
Hello, everybody. My name is Samantha Zylinga, and I am a parent of an incoming fourth grader. As Kelly said, I graduated from here in 2004. My niece and nephew also attend school here, and my grandparents live here, my mom lives here, so we're very invested in this town, in this community. Tonight, I am going to share with you what would happen without a referendum. So this isn't a very pleasant topic, but I think it's a question that everybody would like answered. And it should be noted that everything I mentioned, some of these things could happen with a very small referendum that does pass, all right? Because the smaller the budget, the more cuts that will need to be made. So without a referendum, the school district will need to cut positions and reduce staff pay or freeze staff pay. For every $1 million, that is the equivalent of salary and benefits for 14 teaching positions. So for the 24-25 school year, we have a $2.5 million deficit. That is the equivalent of 35 positions, which is 17% of professional staff. So it kind of puts that in perspective. Last year, my son's third grade, there was like 8 teachers teaching third grade. And so we need to cut 35. It is possible also that student enrollment will decrease as students choose to attend other districts due to cuts that impact the quality of their education. If this happens, additional cuts will need to be made to account for the reduced enrollment. Less students equals less money, less of a budget. Additional changes that could happen would be increased class sizes, reduced elective options, less technology and software, and higher fees. So some of this is already happening for next year. So we'll see like the fees have increased slightly for specific areas. I know especially on the elementary level, all the kids really love like the Epic and Dreambox. All of those software programs cost money, times, by like 1,000 students. That is a significant chunk there. So those will be things that will be looked at as far as being reduced. As far as class sizes go, currently our class sizes are based on enrollment, what type of class, needs of students, and grade level. It all very much fluctuates. There's no answer to say like we have this many kids per class, right? We do have guidelines that we set for ourselves, and those are that we start with 20 students per class in kindergarten, and then you add 1 student as they age, maxing out at 25. So, for example, it's 21 in first grade, 22 in second grade, etc. Historically, we have stayed below these guidelines. As I said, my son is entering 4th grade, and he's never had more than 20 kids in his class before. When like one year, I believe it was 19 even. Next year, that will be changing due to like some shuffling around. Not every single grade and every single class has been affected, but due to the shuffling around of staff, we are still able to stay within these guidelines that we set for ourselves. However, it will be more because historically we were below the guidelines. If there is no referendum, and also if there is a very low referendum, we will surpass these guidelines. So less teachers, same amount of students, more amount of students per class. So now that I'm done with that depressing little speech that I just gave you, Mr. Fisher is going to talk a little bit more about the consequences of not having a referendum.
I feel really blessed and honored to be asked to speak. I taught for 40 years, 37 of them here in McFarland, and I just thoroughly enjoyed what I did. There's something special about being a teacher, and I just love being around my students. I think of them all as my family, and I'm just blessed that I tend to only remember good things. I don't remember the bad times, so that's good. I was asked by a former student, actually, to run for the school board, and it was partly because teacher morale was so bad. we were actually hemorrhaging teachers at that point, particularly in the high school. And it was just kind of depressing to me to see colleagues I had worked with. A number of them went to Epic, and we were losing really outstanding teachers. It turns out in the end, when I got elected, I realized my role is to try to balance the needs of our schools, to try to keep the quality education. And I am so damn proud of the fact that we're number 2 in Dane County. At the same time, trying to balance that with the needs of taxpayers, because I represent everybody here. 70% of the people in this community don't have kids here. I'm one of them. So we got to find that balance and the sweet spots. And I think one of the things that has been kind of discouraging, it was discouraging someone on Wednesday, was that I think there's a lot of people who are kind of thinking we're kind of wedded to our 3 options that we talked about. And I don't feel we are. As a teacher, my goal was always to try to find the way to get a kid to understand something that they couldn't figure out. And as a coach, the same thing. How do you get the kid to understand that? There's like a key, or there's a lock, there's a combination. And can you find that? And this is why I so love teaching. When they do, it is awesome to see their eyes. It's like, oh, I get it. And that happens in a classroom all the time, or with a team that you're coaching. And I think that is our job. I mean, when I say our, that's us, this whole community. We have got to get out of this box. Like, there's only 3 choices. What I'm seeing right now, and this is my perspective, and I'm one of 5 on the school board, I feel like there's a group of people who are saying less filling, another group saying tastes great. And it could be like, I think one of the options we have is that, quite simply, I don't think the school can maintain its quality if we follow that. I think we're going to have it's going to hurt our school district, and I think that hurts the community. At the same time, I think there's one that it was pretty resoundingly, in a sense, spoken, 60-40, that we can't afford this. So I think we got to get out of this kind of mindset, less filling, tastes great. In fact, I kind of jokingly, I was talking with Joe as we walked in here. What happens if they're both right? Or they're both wrong? And I kind of think that's what's going on. I think we got to find something a little bit different, and we'll make it work out. So, anyway, Craig Shervin said it best. We got to find that sweet spot, and I think we can do it. At that first referendum, I remember at one of the meetings sitting next to an elderly woman who said, I know it's important, but I don't know if I can afford this. And that really did hit me in the gut, because I'm going like, she was speaking from her heart. And I want to talk to you from my heart. I mean, I've lived in this community now since 1986. I think we got to balance what she said with what Fort Atkinson has gone through. Fort Atkinson has failed on 2 referenda. They've lost 45 teachers. The morale in that school, the kids have this sense like they don't care about us. The people in this community don't care about us. And what you end up having then is what I call the death spiral. You have people leaving the district, which means that we lose even more revenue, okay, at a very time when we're desperate. We need all the revenue we can, but they're going to other schools because they provide what, the parents and what the students want. So we've got to find that balance, and I think we have got to be really creative here. And I think we can do it. We're all in this together, and I think we can do it. Lloyd Schneider in 1961 took a gamble. And I think you guys got to recognize what that man did, the amount of work. 1961, he said, we want a school, or I want a school. And he talked to his fellow people of McFarland, citizens, and said, are you willing to raise your own taxes to have a school district? And the people resoundingly said yes. And we've done it. We've done amazing things. This school district and this community is special. When I started here, there was a woman named Catherine McCluskey, and anyone who's lived here, okay, and I see Mr. Howery laughing, that woman was intense. She was this kind of frail, but boy, she was as strong as steel. And I'll tell you, I remember I was a 25-year-old, just came out of college and spent 1 year outside of Syracuse and then 1 year in Chicago. And she looked at me and she said, McFarland is a special place. And I remember I was scared to death. And I taught right next to her in my room, and I taught 7th grade civics. But the more I've been in this community, the more I feel we are special. I was telling on Wednesday, this community has had 5 Olympians. I mean, what kind of school district our size can boast that? We've had people that have come through these schools who have done amazing things in music, in art, in business, in education. And you guys have to remember that this place is special, and I think that's where you guys are also part of that special. And we can find a way. We can get through this thing. So, anyway, how do we find a balance? Well, I'll tell you one thing we have to do. We got to have trust in our administrator, okay, our superintendent, and we got to trust our business manager. And I want people to realize that, because there's a lot of people out there going like, oh, these guys, I'm not sure I really trust what they're doing. I want you to know that we are number 2 in Dane County. It was Gary Schneider who told me, he said, we have above average schools for below average costs. I think we can continue that. We can't compete with the Wanakees. We can't compete with Verona, but we can still have better schools than they do. And I think that's what we've got to start thinking about. This guy is willing to basically freeze his salary, even though we're ranked number 2 in Dane County. You got to trust him. He gave us a strategic plan we hadn't had for 30 years. He has worked on a staff handbook. We haven't given the teachers in this district a raise. Well, we've given them half of it, with the idea that we're hoping next year we can do it. And yet, the teachers in this district trust him incredibly. Jerry Herbst, you're sitting there. Jerry Herbst wrote a letter when he was recommending him when we were going through the different candidates for superintendent. It was your letter that convinced me that this is the guy we had to have. Because you talked about the kind of job, the kind of person he was at the Indian Mound Middle School. So I want you to realize he's willing to work with, we're sitting here with Angie, and we've got people who are on the union, and they're willing to say, we will find ways we can cut. And they've done that. It's that trust. You guys, we have to have that trust. You've got to trust us. We've got to trust you. We've got to work with this man. The other one is Jeff Mahoney. I just wanted it clear that Jeff Mahoney won Business Manager of the Year for the state of Wisconsin. Now, I mentioned this on Wednesday of this past meeting, but believe it or not, when I was sitting in those interviews to interview the people who were applying for our superintendent of schools, they were asked a question, why do you apply here? 2 of them, I just find this unbelievable. 2 of them said, we want to work with Jeff Mahoney. He is that good. We're going to need that man if we're going to have to find something out of the box of those 3. How can we do it? Is it going to be maybe non-recurring? Is it going to be something that he's convinced, and he can convince him, and he can convince the board and the parents and this community that we can maintain that kind of level of education we want? Can he do that at the same time, that we're going to find that answer that we're looking for? We need him. We need your trust. We need your faith that we're going to be working together, because we are all in this together. I'll just finish with one really, again, for someone who's been here a long time. You might remember Gene Olson, another guy who scared the bejeepers out of me as a young teacher, but he taught English in this school district for a long time. He had a wonderful saying, and I think it reminds me of, again, what McFarland is and the way we've always handled ourselves. He said, tradition must be served. We've got to keep up what we're doing and what we've always done. So thank you very much, and let's go, McFarland.
Excellent. So now we are going to move into talking more specifically about the survey, the options that you were presented, and share the results. And we have Cassandra Dennis with us.
Good evening. My name is Cassandra Dennis, and I am a mother of 2 students in the district, an incoming 7th grader and an incoming 3rd grader. I am also a homeowner and a taxpayer in McFarland. So I'm going to talk to you first about the survey purpose. So based on the input from the referendum engagement group, the survey included 3 referendum options, all of which are less expensive than the April failed referendum. All 3 options include continuing the $1.2 million in cuts that we have already made. We were for 4 years and provide ongoing funding, meaning it does not expire. This is known as a recurring referendum. Each option adds additional money each year. That is because the cost to maintain an employee increases each year as their pay and benefits increase. These options were chosen to get a sense of what was most important to the community, including their tax tolerance. Based on your feedback tonight, the board can decide to use one of these options, none of these options, a non-recurring referendum option, meaning that it will expire after a few years. So I want to just put a plug out, those comment forms that you have as you leave. We are looking at those. Those are going to be presented to the referendum committee engagement group and then also sent to the board. So we're really here to get your feedback and help us to come up with a plan for the November election. So before I get into reviewing the options that were on the survey, could I see by a show of hands who participated in the survey and turned in the survey? Okay, so some of you have seen this information before, and some of it will be new for you. So I'm going to start with option 1 that was presented. It was the lowest total amount for $6.4 million. The amount increases $1.6 million each year for 4 years. So for a $400,000 property value, the total amount increases between $373 and $399 per year, and these add up each year. By year 4, your taxes will be $1,554 more than they are currently. This option requires an additional $1.6 million in cuts and would keep the staff salaries below the area average. Next, I want to review option 2. The total is for $7 million. The amount increases $1.75 million each year for 4 years. For a $400,000 property, the total amount increases between $404 and $430 per year, and these add up each year. By the end of the year 4, your taxes would be $1,677 more than they currently are. This option keeps the staff salaries below the area average. Option 3, which was the third option and final option, is for $7.6 million. The amount increases $1.9 million each year for 4 years. For a $400,000 property, the total amount increases between $432 and $456 per year, and these add up each year. By the end of year 4, your taxes would be $1,785 more than they currently are. This option increases our starting salaries of teacher to be near or at the area average. Now, I know those are a lot of numbers, and I went through them very quickly, especially for those of you who are seeing this for the first time. So I want to summarize some of the differences for you. All of these options have a large base increase above $1,550 mark per property valued at $400,000 over 4 years. The total difference between option 1 and option 3 is about $60 per year, meaning option 1 saves the taxpayers $60 per year compared to option 3. Over 4 years, we have an increase of $1,554 for option 1 and $1,785 for option 3, or about $240 total. Now we compare the differences in what they buy. Option 1 requires an additional $1.6 million in cuts, which is equivalent to the salary and benefits of 23 teachers. And it keeps salaries of teachers below the area average. Option 2 costs about $30 more per year than option 1. It maintains current staffing, but like the lowest option, it doesn't catch salaries up with the area averages. Option 3 does not include additional cuts and increases the salaries to be closer to the area average. Some of those things are very scary to read out loud. So option 1, like we talked about, a low referendum, 23 teachers would need to be cut in our district. Aaron, I'm going to turn it over to you to go over those results.
Thank you very much. Doing some math, one of the questions I would have if I were you is, well, I heard other districts passed referendums, so what were their amounts like? And I did a little research, had to do some math, and I feel really confident about my math skills. So Monona Grove, Oregon, and Stoughton all have passed referendums, operational referendums, in the past 2 years. And while Stoughton's was for 4 years, Monona Grove's and Oregon's were for 3 years. So I adjusted, since ours were for 4 years, to account for that. All 3 of those districts passed recurring referendums. So that just means that the amount of money continues on after it continues to build over that 3 to 4 year period. So adjusting for that, they also, I will note that all of them list their tax impact in $100,000 estimates, and we talk in $400,000 estimates, which is the average property value. So when I make that adjustments for the $400,000, so Stoughton's referendum would, at the end of 4 years, result in an increase of $2,124. Monona Grove's would be $1,781, and Oregon's would be $1,381. So a range from about $1,400 to $2,100 for those. So that was a question I've been asked and didn't have the numbers for, so I'm pleased to provide that with you. We're now going to look at a video from a group called School Perceptions, and they helped us with the survey. And we chose to use some outside consultants. And you may be thinking, well, why are you paying somebody to do a survey for you when you could do it yourself? There's a couple of reasons. One is they're experts in this area. They have a 94% prediction rate. So if they say a referendum is going to pass or fail, 94% of the time they're right, which is pretty impressive, and many districts around the state use them. Also, they're an objective party. They are there just to get us the information, and you're going to see a video from them that I think will show their objectivity. They're just here to provide it to us, not to sway us in any way, not to influence us, but to provide the data to us. So they're going to share these results in this video, and then I'll share a little bit after that, and we'll get into some question and answer time.
Hello, McFarland School District. My name is Scott Gerard, and I am a project manager with School Perceptions. I had the opportunity to work on your community survey this spring and summer, and here I am to present the results. I'm going to go through a few different kinds of information tonight. So first of all, we've got background info, and anything with that blue logo is going to look mostly familiar to you. That's going to cover a lot of what was in your survey as a reminder. We'll go through survey and respondent information about who took your survey. We'll get to the results and analysis, and at the end, there will be a time for a wrap up and questions. Little reminder about us at School Perceptions and our experience. Founded in 2002, and we have helped more than 1,000 districts navigate the strategic planning and referendum planning process. So, your survey. There was a July 3rd deadline. We are at 1,451 respondents, which gets us to a 24.2% response rate. That's a really good response rate. The average we see is in the high teens, mid to high teens. And so hearing from this large of a segment of your community tells you that they were ready to share with you their thoughts on the plans presented to them. And you're getting some really good data. We feel good once we surpass about 10% as far as how predictive our data is. And so being at 24.2 is just a really strong number. That margin of error on the bottom there is just a product of the number of respondents. So out of anyone's control, really just depends on how many people respond, but it's an important number to keep in mind as we go through the results. So who took your survey? Among respondents, 30% were in the 35 to 44 range. Not surprising to see that, and the 45 to 54 range being the top two. A lot of parents in that age range who are responding. We did have 24% in the 65 plus group, which we really like to see. Good representation there. Those folks will show up in November and will reliably vote, and so it's important to hear from them on the survey to understand how they're feeling about your plans. 93% of your respondents do have their primary residence in the district, which means that they will be able to vote on a potential ballot initiative. 6% here that said no, and the 1% that are not sure. Those could be folks, open enrollment families, staff who live outside the district's borders. Their thoughts are really important, and we still want to hear from them in the survey. But when we're predicting an election outcome for November, we need to look at that 93% who live within the district boundaries and will be able to vote. We had representation from all of the municipalities, 77%, vast majority from the village of McFarland. 11% of your respondents were staff members, 49% were parents, and then the remainder is going to be the biggest group in your community, and that is the non-parents, non-staff. We asked, how do you like to receive school and district information? As you can see, your non-parents, non-staff really like your newsletters. That's a really high number for newsletters among that group, so that's good to see. Your parents like your emails. So those are two good ways to communicate with your community. And now on to the referendum question. So a little reminder of the options that were presented to folks. So first we have option 1 here, option 2, and option 3. So this slide, we break down by those 3 subgroups that I had mentioned earlier. We have staff, we have parents, and we have non-parents, non-staff. What we do here is this first group, the 34% of non-parents, non-staff, would support option 3. So basically, 53% of parents would support option 3, and 57% of staff would support option 3. The next one over is option 2, so slightly smaller. So as we move to the right on this line, it's pretty safe that most of the folks who would support a bigger referendum will support a step down and the steps down after that. And so we add these numbers as we move to the right. So what that means is your 34% of non-parents, non-staff who would support option 3, plus your 5% of non-parents, non-staff who would support option 2, mean that we have 39% support among non-parents, non-staff for option 2. Another 5, now we're up to 44%. What we then look at is when that support for each group surpasses 50%. So what you can see here is among both your parents and your staff, you surpass that 50% within option 3. However, among your non-parents, non-staff, which again are the largest segment of your community, you don't surpass that 50% until we get to smaller referendum. And so that is going to come into play on this slide. So we use some data from the Census Bureau to estimate what your voting population is going to look like. About 30% of your voters are going to be parents. About 70% of your voters are going to be non-parents, non-staff. So what that means is we have to weight those percentages that we looked at in the previous slide. So what we do is we take that 30% of parents, multiply it by the parent support for each option. Then we take the 70% of non-parents, non-staff, multiply it by the non-parent, non-staff support for each option. When we add those two numbers together, we get a predicted vote outcome. So what these numbers mean is if the election were held today, option 3, if a referendum were on the ballot for option 3, 39.7% would vote yes for that. If a referendum were on the ballot for option 2, we would predict 44.7% would vote yes for that initiative. Both of those are obviously below 50% and outside the margin of error. Now at option 1, we're at 49.7%, which is basically 50%. So right here, we've got a 50-50 shot for option 1 if it were on the ballot today. As you go smaller, that number jumps up pretty significantly. But again, right here is where you reach that point where you've got a chance to potentially see approval given the margin of error. Now that margin of error is plus or minus, so it could be above 50%. You also could be slightly lower. So that's important to keep in mind, but you're right at that 50-50, you have a shot. Stepping away briefly from the referendum, the overall satisfaction data. So we ask respondents on a 1 to 4 scale to rate the district in 4 different areas. Because it's a 1 to 4 scale, the median is a 2.5. As you can see among your staff and your parents, every single area is above that median. Non-parents, non-staff, you're above a 3.0 at delivering a high quality education, just below a 3.0 at building pride in the community, and a couple lower numbers here. For what it's worth, managing funds appropriately is almost always the lowest number on these surveys, especially with an operational referendum. Folks who take a survey about the district asking for more money are going to have questions about how funds are being managed. So another way of looking at that data, this is just among all respondents. And so you can see your percent great or good here, how many folks responded with that 3 or 4, and the average that comes out to. As you can see, again, for everything except that managing funds, you're above the median, and you're just below it there with about half of folks saying you're doing good or great at managing funds appropriately. One other overall satisfaction measure, we ask on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend the district to a friend or family member? The average for the district was a 7.18. What we find most important to focus on in this slide are these top 3 numbers. So those are going to be your sort of district ambassadors. They're folks who are out there talking you up, even if no one brings you up, and saying positive things. And so we surpass 50% up to 54% above those top, within those top 3. And so seeing that kind of support is just, it's a very positive result at this point for you all. And that is the end of our results. If anyone has any questions, the district knows how to reach me, but thank you all for the opportunity to work on your survey.
We are grateful to School Perceptions for their work with the survey and their help in this matter. We also looked at some of the comments, and I think it's important to highlight some of them. I will tell you that 46% of all people that filled out that survey left a comment. There are over 900 comments. I read each and every one of them. I will tell you, here's some themes that emerged from those comments. Oops, I did this last time, didn't I? I'm gonna have Ethan help me. He's gonna come up here. As Ethan's coming up here, thank you. I don't know how to get out of there. But I'm gonna tell you some stuff. So if you look at if I go through the comments and they were able to compile them into a few themes. The biggest theme that we saw when people were asked, well, why would you not support any referendum? Okay, great question. And the most common answer was, it's just my property taxes, just too high. And that was the most common reason, which makes sense. A lot of people shared some thoughts on how the district could cut some costs. Some people shared the idea of, I might support a referendum if it was non-recurring. So if at the end of that 4 years or however many years, it just stopped, that amount stopped, and we kind of saw where we're at after that. People talked about financial mismanagement and perceptions of that. There were some communication issues that people highlighted, in which we definitely own, and some conversations about state funding and feeling like the state needs to step up. Those were some things that people shared in their comments. More importantly, or just as importantly, I should say, was in terms of the satisfaction. I just think, as the superintendent, I just want to note that it is very clear to me how much you value our teachers, and I need them to know that as well. We don't want that this decision that people need to make, which is a financial decision as well for them, that means that they don't value and appreciate their teachers. And so people took an opportunity on this survey to say what great teachers we have and how much they mean to this community. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. So if you look at those results, as you can see, just to put it all together, is that option 1 had the most support of any of the 3 options, and that was about a 50-50 swing there. Option 2, less support, and then option 3, which was the larger of the 3, had the least support, about 40%. And you probably have a lot of details that you're wondering. Sometimes people like to get into that data, and I'm happy to talk to you about that and look at it some different ways. I actually have some questions right now that I'll be getting back to in the office and analyzing and breaking down the data differently. But it is one indicator of where you as a community are feeling about a possible future referendum. And again, the board really has a lot of opportunities. We're going to continue to gather feedback, both here at these meetings, your exit slips, which you're going to fill out. And you can always contact our board. They've been starting office hours, which has been really well received. You can email them. You can, of course, email me. You can come to a board meeting and make a public comment. You can write public comments. Our next board meeting is August 5th. And at that meeting, the referendum engagement group is going to say, well, here's what we heard from the survey, from the feedback, and here's some things we want the board to consider. If the board does decide to have a referendum, they would need to set that question by August 27th. And election day is 100 days from today. I just heard today. So interesting. So that's kind of our presentation. We know we had a lot of background information we wanted to get to you. Don't know how entertaining it was, but at least it was informative, and wanted to share those survey results. But now's the part where we're going to get into some question and answers. And the way that we're going to do this is we want to honor our people at home. They have an opportunity to ask questions virtually. We're going to go back and forth between our people in-house asking questions and those virtually. Try to limit your question or comment to about 30 seconds. I say that, we've built in a buffer for that, but we just want to make sure we get as many people able to speak as possible. We'd like ideally that everyone has an opportunity to ask one question before we come back around and have someone ask another question, just to make sure we hear as many voices as possible. And of course, be kind, be open to others' ideas, try to limit your side conversations. That can be distracting. And if you're anything like the group on Wednesday, you're going to have really thoughtful, excellent questions, and be able to follow those ground rules to help us be moving quickly. We also have one of our referendum engagement group members who is here, Amy. She is our runner. So she is going to run a mic. So make sure to speak into that mic so that if you're in-house, the public can hear you. We also, the questions will largely be answered by our referendum engagement group members. Now you may be thinking, well, you're the superintendent. Can't you answer that question? Yeah, I probably could. But sometimes I talk in eduspeak. And we want to make sure that we take the time to translate things so that they're just simple and easy for you to understand. So a referendum engagement group may start with that. I'm going to start with a virtual question just to honor those that are watching online, and then we'll jump into one in-house. Here's the first question. How do open enrolled students impact the overall operational budget? Since the residents of the village tax burden would not benefit from those students' property taxes. So an open enrollment. I will see if any of our referendum engagement group members feel like they can answer that. It's fine if you can't. I do know the answer to this question. Okay. You gonna give it a try?
So when students from other districts enroll in McFarland, it brings about $9,000 per student to the district. And the district spends about $12,000 for each resident student. So it is still benefit for us to allow open enrollment so that we get some income versus $0 for an empty seat. So it actually helps increase the amount of revenue coming into the district.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, so the way that it works for schools is when you have students open enroll in, but you don't have to add staff, then you're just right-sizing your classes. So it's kind of like filling them up so that extra revenue just fills up your classes closer to the optimal guideline. When you have kids that open enroll out, you do get to keep $3,000 of that $12,000, but $9,000 goes to that other district. So it's really financially viable to have kids open enroll in. And so we've expanded our open enrollment numbers for next year, and will likely with the following year as based on enrollment projections. All right, how about a question in-house? Who has a question? Okay, she's coming down. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I'll try to be 30 seconds, but you guys have had an hour. And I think everybody on stage is for this referendum. I don't think there's anybody that is on the stage that's against it. And I'm against it. I'm what's being labeled as an opponent. Really, truly, honestly, my son went through the school system and thought it was amazing. He said nothing but amazing things about the people that he was in contact with. The people that are here tonight and up on stage, kudos, man. It's a Sunday night. That's incredible. I mean, and all the people that are here on a Sunday night, I'm here to also say that I think I'm right. I think all three of these proposals are losers, and I don't think any of them will pass. It seems like option one is the best bet according to survey results. And it's a crapshoot, and I think their numbers are skewed a little bit. I don't think you're going to get 20% of the community to flip, and that's what would have to happen for any one of these. If we go from 60 to 40, you need 21% of those people to flip and say that. We need a better choice, and we need what Bruce said. We need some outside-the-box thinking, and I think I came up with an idea, and I would like to propose it at least as an idea. You guys can say I'm crazy on the way out when you're driving home, but there are some districts in the country that are very successfully running a 4-day school week. And a lot of the challenges that they thought they would have with it have turned out to be very small and very minor. I think we should be very proud as a community that we have not passed a referendum. It's really presented as a negative. We should be proud of the fact that we haven't had to do it. And we should be proud of the fact that we have the ability and the outside thinking to not have to do it again. If we went to a 4-day school week, we could retain teachers because the quality of life that they would have would be greater working 1 day less a week. And time again, as we ask employees, why are they leaving a job? Very rarely is it compensation. It's quality of life and not seeing their dogs or being able to kayak or spending time with their family. If we gave them that one extra day off and didn't necessarily increase their pay, we're going to see more teachers want to stay here, and we're going to attract a lot more teachers here. As we start looking at younger people in the workforce, They don't want to work 5 days a week. They think it's awful, and they can't believe that we all did it. Why don't we start attracting some younger teachers with a 4-day work week and a very small referendum, one even below option one? Because I think we would all vote for about $250 increase. You start talking about going north of 4, it's a loser. It's not going to happen. And we need to have another idea available, I think, before this referendum. Because if you put this referendum out there, it's going to fail again. A lot of people are going to vote in December. We got a big election, so we're going to have a referendum on it. They're voting with their pocketbook. It can't win, and it won't. And then what happens? Then we start looking at, quote, scary stuff. We don't want that. So let's come up with another idea. And I guess my question really truly is, has this been thought about? And who do we talk to about maybe floating the idea and doing some research on it?
Aaron, can I just say one thing and then you can answer his question?
Sure.
I just want to point out that within the referendum engagement group, there were very strong no's and very strong yeses within the group. So I just want to make that clear that while us sitting up here on this panel do appear, and I believe are all for the referendum, that this group was strategically put together. And we had, I mean, the meetings went well where we had civil conversations, but like outside, like personally, like outside of the group, some members and I have had like very intense back and forth conversations about this issue. So please know that the district didn't surround themselves by yes people, that there were a lot of no people in the group as well.
Oh, you go ahead.
Thanks for your comments. As a compensation professional, I love to think of creative ideas to help organizations fulfill their needs with the labor market. From external markets, 4-day work weeks really are new based on COVID and have absolutely become successful in a lot of different industries. Service industries, 24/7 operations, this becomes a little bit more difficult, but we definitely see places trying to think outside of the box in this space. I think that's a great idea to think about the structure and design of instruction and education to do that. So I briefly, and then I really just Googled this right now, but I looked at DPI instruction because I know that there are hourly requirements that DPI requires. Okay, so, and maybe it has, but Googling it, yep, so Googling it today and knowing about teacher contract hours, because we know that teachers don't work a full 12 months, 40 hours a week, like a lot of industries, which is 2,080 hours a year. Their contract is actually 1,560 hours, if that's correct, Aaron. 1,560 is their contract, correct?
Sure.
So,
I will go with your math there.
So if I'm doing basic math by maintaining a 12-week summer program, 12-week absence of instruction during the summer, a 36-hour work week provides a teacher with 1,440 hours of work for that annual amount for their contract. And if I'm looking at the hours that DPI requires, it says that for grades 1 through 6, it requires in-person instruction, 1,050 hours of direct pupil instruction in grades 1 through 6, and at least 1,137 hours of direct pupil instruction in grades 7 through 12. So I don't know the intricacies of this, and I know that we have our instructional director here, and I forget her specific title, but does a 4-day work week based on the months in which a teacher could work allow for that instruction? Maybe. Are these required DPI hours under that 1,440? Yes, but it doesn't provide as much wiggle room, I would say, and I would offer any comment from anyone who does work in education if that is even a feasible
So they're going to daycare, they're going to fire. If they're daycare, which would then pick up the smaller cost that they might have to pay for an additional one extra day the child's not in school. And it picks up the requirements the teachers need. At the middle school and high school level, the hours are less than they are at the elementary school. So you maybe need to get a little more creative on the elementary school side of it, but you can start looking at a smaller winter break, a smaller holiday break.
So just, I want to be, I appreciate the suggestion of, looking out of the box in a 4-day work week. There is different opinions about that, certainly within the field. I would say a couple things I just want to correct is the instructional minutes they actually increase as the age goes up of the students, and you would need to extend the length of the school year, obviously, to account for that. One of the things that you often hear about a 4-day school week in some of the districts that have tried it and actually gone back was the impact on the community just with childcare. So it does take some startup time to accommodate for that as well. So there, the truth is that fifth day for most of those kids, they need to find some care. But it's certainly good to look at all the options, and that is one that just requires a great degree of study, as would year-round school or other viable options such as that. Did you have something to say, Melanie, or are you good?
I think I'm good. I think you
Yes.
hit on a lot of it.
I would just add that that doesn't really help our teachers in any way, shape, or form. If we're adding hours to their day, we're not taking account for all of the work they do outside of the building with our children, such as planning and grading and calling parents and all of those things that it doesn't appear that going to a 4-day work week and adding more time to their day just gives them more work on 4 days than 5 days.
Are you going to say something, Kelly? Because I don't want to make this totally about the 4-day work week. I mean, it's a good idea. I just want to make sure we get other questions.
An additional day off really wouldn't be a day off for teachers. Teachers regularly are working well outside of contracted hours on any number of things. So, the appeal of it, I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm one person, but I don't know that it would be a day off per se.
Well, I think it's important to just acknowledge that, what this individual is saying is, I think, felt by many, is that we need maybe another option, and that the more creative you can get and really think out of the box, the better. And certainly that's one option to consider, and I know there's others out there too. So the district always has to be looking at, creative ways to reduce costs and continue a high quality education. Let's take another, we don't have any virtual questions, so another in-house question. Over there.
Aaron, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the responders, 60% of them, 11% were staff, and 49% were parents. They're two very motivated groups of people. Mm-hmm. And option 3, 2, and 1, I would guess, my guess, do you think that if you had a broader response group, those numbers would be lower?
Well, yes, and I think that's why they did weight those based on the overall population of our community. So instead of just taking those numbers and counting them equally, they weighed the non-staff responses higher. Does that address your concern?
Well, I guess I think what you're saying is that somehow they manipulated the numbers to account for the fact that staff and parents are a highly motivated group that would probably want to have a referendum passed for the benefit of their children or their job, for that matter.
I would say what they did was they compensated for the overrepresentation of those groups in the survey population to make sure it was representative of our community. So by doing that 70%, timesing it by 0.7, they tried to account for that. But certainly, you're correct that primarily our parents were overrepresented in the survey, actually completing the survey results. And that's why when I first looked at it, I looked at the data and I thought, well, it looks like, this option's the most popular. But then when they did that weighting, that was when it made it more that 50-50. And again, I will say their process has been tested numerous times across districts, and by weighting it, hopefully they have accounted for that disproportionate representation and underrepresentation from our non-parent, non-staff. Thank you. Another in-house question.
I actually have 2 questions, so maybe I can ask both of them. The first one is in regards to compensation. Did anybody look at what % of teachers' salaries are attributable to the benefits, and what % those have increased over the last, say, 10 years since Act 10, and therefore what portion of inflation wasn't covered by the benefit costs? Like, I think everybody in the community knows, right, that their health insurance has gone up substantially. Like if you work in the private sector, right, you're paying a lot more than you would for your insurance. So what portion of teachers' salaries and overall compensation has gone up for things that are maybe not fixed, right, that are variable and outside the school district's control? I assume you have some control over what you negotiate for benefit plans, but I think we've seen double-digit increases in the private sector, so I was curious as to what element of the budget is captured in that.
So I'll look to Aaron for the specific numbers because he's much closer to them than I am, and I'm not an employee or someone working for the district in any capacity. I'm just a parent looking at some numbers, but I do know that the 77% of the school's budget is accounting for salaries and benefits, right? 12% of that is the benefit portion, which we think of as our health insurance or any of those supplemental benefits that we receive as an employee. And those are negotiated by the district. Typically, an employer uses a broker to do that, to see how much they're going to pay for that dean coverage versus UW Health, et cetera, right? And that is indeed increasing. I don't know the cost now, but I do know that the school district needs to negotiate that next year for the following year. So the costs for that health insurance coverage are fixed for this year, but will indeed increase the following year too. And that's part of this forecasting of the referendum options increasing over time, is to help pay for what we know will be those increases. Something to know too is that teachers, what we've seen and through the data about benefit usage of the existing employees in the district is that most of them take family coverage for health insurance. Stereotypically, I'll say it, teachers are typically a secondary income for a family, and then they hold the benefits for that family. So when we talk about competitiveness, though, and competing and maintaining compensation, not just base pay, but the health insurance too, we have to continue to offer something that is competitive, that is family coverage, because that's what our staff need. So, for when you go to the negotiating table with a broker and you're looking at different options, whether you choose SSM Health or UW Health or GHC, we ultimately need to offer the most expensive option, which is that health insurance. The levers that they can pull are increasing the deductible, increasing the maximum out-of-pocket limit, increasing the premium, offering different tiers of coverage, single plus child, family coverage. But ultimately, we know that that really is a driver of what employees within the district want and need and use. So although it isn't something that we can absolutely look at options, but the reality is that that's going to continue to increase with inflation just as everything else, so we need to be cognizant of both base pay and health insurance. And I know that to specifically answer your question, Aaron might have more detail.
So we are in our second and final year of our current health insurance contract, which saw a 14% increase a couple of years ago. And so, you know, we're really at that spot right now where we're in a difficult position where we need to negotiate and try to get, of course, that increase in that premium as low as possible. But certainly that is something that we have to account for a district. One of the things that's challenging with benefits is, as you were sharing, how unpredictable that they are. You know, we can guess, we do work with a broker that helps to negotiate those and get them as low as we can. However, it's much less predictable than a salary increase that we have much more control over. And you'll see districts often jumping from one provider to another just to try to negotiate a lower cost. And that can be really challenging on families, switching providers, as you know, in the private sector as well. So, you know, those certainly are things that we do need to account for. We're focusing on salaries in our discussions because we feel like that's something we can predict. It's very tangible, but we do have to account for benefits.
So maybe related to that, I guess, I don't know if you have a data point on this, but I guess I was perceiving that in order to maintain current levels of salary and benefits, you would need to adjust for inflation. Otherwise, essentially, teachers are paid less than they were 10 years ago, right?
Correct.
Because you didn't accommodate for that, whereas in the private sector, your wages and your benefits have increased versus teachers have been held basically
Correct.
at a lower level than the private sector, which is probably why you're seeing people leave to go do something else at, you know, another private sector employer because they can't get paid competitively. Even if they can get a 4-day work week, they couldn't get necessarily the benefits and the pay that they need to maintain their own family. So my second question was in regard to the property taxes. It seemed like that was a complaint or a concern of people was the increasing property taxes. Are there ever other levers besides costs of school that could be reduced in the property taxes so that maybe of the pie, your property taxes account for more of the school's budget and less of other things like trash removal or things like that in the community that maybe need to be more people in the community need to take responsibility for? So I don't know if from the village board or from other people in the community, if there's other things that we can do to reduce the overall property tax budget such that, or maintain property taxes at a consistent level, but increase the school funding.
Any one of our group members want to give that a try?
So yes, this has been a topic of conversation, I think on like all levels of government, right? So village spending has been a common thing that's being brought up over and over again. And I think most people just look at their bottom line, right? Like, this is your property tax bill. If you go through and you look at the details and who's getting what part, you actually notice that the school part has decreased over the past few years, while things like the village or your municipality and the county and MATC and things like that have gone up. So the school district, because it is its own separate tax entity, can only control itself. Right? We can work with the village, you can talk to the village, you can talk to the county, you can talk about state funding, but there's nothing that they can directly do to change that because they can't control them and those other boards' voting habits. So my personal suggestion is, if you think that is a concern, to start addressing it on those other levels with those other boards and with the county and the village.
I would just add to that. Sam was talking about that this is kind of a conversation that's picking up right now. And here, I'm going to move because I feel like I can't see everybody. I think a big theme in those conversations that we're kind of confronting as a community is really considering what are the wants and the needs. And where does the school district fit within that? Where do, all the needs and services that it provided by the village, at the county level, all sorts of things. And what are the additional wants that we maybe need to hold off on in order to make room for the needs?
One last thing that I'll mention too is that I think I agree with a lot of people I've heard in the community that the overall tax bill is high, but the school tax portion of that has been decreasing over time. Well, why can't the taxing entities just share? I already gave you this much money. Why can't you just give some to the school and not spend it on X, Y, and Z? The reality is that isn't one bank account, and they can't just willingly provide a gift to in a different taxing entity or municipality, what have you. They need to use it for the designated purposes in their own bank account and in their own budget. So there isn't really this ability to just share and take from the pool when there are specific needs of different entities. The buckets do remain separate and independent. So that's where I think we're struggling, or at least I was as a taxpayer. I was like, well, my taxes already increased. Why isn't the school having enough of the resources that it needs? It's because most of the money didn't go to the place where we're identifying there is a current issue.
I would add that also a priority for the district and the village is collaborating on joint projects that result in savings and reduced costs. And the one that comes to mind, because it's an important and exciting project that is well underway and will be ready in a month, is the Inclusive Park. So the Inclusive Park on Wabisa Intermediate School, we needed to have a new playground. That playground was old, it was failing, so we needed to replace it. At the same time, the village had plans to develop a park nearby. We collaborated on that project, and by sharing resources, we were able to save over $1 million to the taxpayers. So those things, and a solar farm that we're working on together and other projects, those are ways we're trying to be efficient and collaborate. And we meet regularly and collaborate with the village. I think the fact that the village has been represented at these meetings shows that commitment, but it is a continued conversation, and the community is continually reminding us of that importance and that expectation that we are collaborating on that work and reducing the tax burden as much as possible. Thank you. Other questions? No one online asking questions? They must have all their answers.
Thanks. Thanks for all the information. It's really helpful. I'm staring at these numbers from the options, and I'm confused about something, and maybe I feel like I'm missing something when I compare it to the survey results. So there's an interest in option 1 or even lower referendums, and at that point you're losing a substantial number of staff, right? But then for not a ton more, you retain that staff. Like if I was going to pay $1,550 more for 4 years, which is nothing, right? Like that's a lot. Why wouldn't I, like the return on investment seems really bad for option 1 or something less. Like if you were gonna have your taxes go up, you should want to retain the staff minimally. And especially given that it's only like $60 a year different between the one that retains the staff and the one that loses. It just seems like a bad return on investment, or like so anyway, what am I missing? Because
you're not missing anything.
Okay.
That's what it is. It is. You are right on track there. I like last time I compared it to crowdfunding. So you know how people like a GoFundMe. If we all pitch in $5 or $10, we can pay this person's rent or pay off their medical bill. It's just like that, except on a larger scale. So $60 more from each household adds up and makes a massive difference within the schools.
I crunched some numbers. The difference between option 1, the lowest, and option 3, the highest, for the first year is $4.92 a month. As we increase, remember it builds every year, the difference between the lowest and the highest at the last year is $19.25 a month. That's Netflix. So I had to double check my math too, and I do math for a living, and I was like, is this a joke right now? But $4.92 a month is the difference between the one that cuts 25 teachers and the one that keeps them. You're correct.
And one thing that has been phenomenal for me about this process is the numbers people. I've learned so much from the numbers people because that is not my wheelhouse, as they say. To talk a little bit about retention from kind of the teacher, like the school, how it operates. I talked before about connection and community, and relationships are really the foundation of teaching. And, I worry about potential ripple effects of staff cuts because not only is there the class size thing, there's a cost, sort of a human cost to that in terms of, at the high school level. So students might have the same teacher for, 3 of their 4 years here. That's a relationship. There can be a cost, so to speak, in terms of constantly onboarding new staff within a department, having them learn the curriculum, or if it's a brand new teacher, we all were new at something once, right? You learn, there's things that you learn as you go. So the retention piece, is important for our kids and their sense of continuity as they go through school, but also at the staff level, constant turnover is a real challenge from a staff perspective too.
I'll definitely add to this. I think, because you're hearing, you caught it, and we've had these conversations, right? This is my husband. It's going to depend on the individual voter. And so, dollar for dollar, sure, option 3 is the better deal, right? If you're going to walk up to $1,550 in tax increase over 4 years, it's true that that extra $230, $240 will get you more bang for your buck, right? We'll we'll keep the staff we have and catch up salary to be competitive. But that line is going to be different for everybody, right? So if you care about the dollar for dollar deal, then option 3 is great. But it's been a long time since there's been a really good used car that costs under $2,000, but just to make an analogy, you imagine the situation where just in an emergency, your car stopped working, you need a new car. And you go to the lot, and you go to the used car lot, and you say, okay, what can I get for my, my $2,000? And somebody says, this $1,785 one is a reputable brand. It's got low miles. It's the best deal. And you go, well, I don't know, like this $1,550 one. It might have all the miles. It might look like it's due for a lot of maintenance, but maybe the line for you is between that $1,500 and that $1,700. Maybe we've all been in those situations. Maybe the best deal isn't really what you can afford. And so I think people are just going to have to decide whether those differences are big to them for what they get, or whether that's a critical, difference, or whether it's just a small difference.
Yeah, I think it's just important to think about the majority of people with the survey results said that they would support something smaller than the 3 options as well. And so I think there's some people, particularly people on fixed income, that are feeling like, I think I could maybe do option 3, but that's going to be a stretch. And that's some of the comments that I read too. So I think the way that the group has phrased it, I think is really good. And it's a lot to consider, and the board certainly has a lot to consider because, all of them are a significant increase, and we acknowledge that. We certainly do. So, these are difficult decisions, but you do have that range correct. That is accurate. In the examples we presented, we just wanted to get some feedback, so there certainly could be a different option.
And coming back for a second to the to your idea, you know, thinking outside the box, I think particularly since COVID and the impact that COVID had on schools and so forth, I think is always, you know, needed, always a good idea to be thinking about how do we reimagine systems or structures, right? I think, I feel like that would be such a huge shift that it would require, you know, a significant planning time, whereas we're kind of in this crunch this coming year. So,
Yeah, there is a sense of urgency, certainly, currently. All right, other questions?
First of all, thank you for this forum. Appreciate all the work that you guys are doing. One comment, a couple comments actually. Just heard on the news, I think the city of Janesville is doing a 2-year non-reoccurring. So just something to consider. Why are they doing it? Maybe look into that a little bit more as you're going through all of this. The second comment was you had some good slides about the cumulative effect, which I don't think was really presented in the recent referendum. And there was a lot of stuff on social media, both good and bad, about that. So the more you can present the cumulative effect, I think is going to be really good. So about the benefits, as somebody raised earlier. Obviously, you guys, we all pay into the state of Wisconsin pension as teachers, right? McFarland's not paying pension. It's all coming from the state of Wisconsin, correct?
No, the district does pay in for retirement.
Okay.
We contribute to that.
What's that now?
The district does contribute to retirement benefits, if that's what you're asking.
Okay. So
and so does staff.
Okay. I'm thinking more though, is there any statute that prevents school districts from also negotiating like state employees do? If you serving the state, it seems like you'd have more collective power. And I know this is maybe out of the box, but that's what Bruce wanted tonight, is have school districts have that same negotiating power with state employees, that you're not always having to negotiate just as McFarland or just as Oregon is doing, that if all school districts can negotiate with that kind of collective power, or in addition with state employees, you'd have much more, and you can probably get those health benefits down. Just food for thought.
Thank you.
Hey, Aaron, if I could jump in on the Janesville question. The Janesville referendum is for a $14.5 million operating fund that it was approved in 2020, and this would be an extension of those funds through 2027. So
Okay.
it's a continuation of something that's been voted on in the past.
And is that a village or a city referendum? Or I mean a city or a school district?
That is the Janesville School District.
Okay, thank you.
They are also voting on a capital referendum, $151 million for facilities.
Thank you. And you certainly do see range of years, recurring, non-recurring, so I think it's good to bring up those examples. I appreciate that. Other questions?
Okay. I have two comments and a question. This should be fairly quick. So since last Thursday's meeting, I've been talking to and getting comments from many people. I seem to have found myself in a position to be in front of a lot of people lately, and I'm here to give feedback on what I've heard. But I do want to say at first that myself, I see and understand and agree that we do need good teachers and we need to retain them. So that being said, the first feedback and comment that I have is, although I did address this to the district last Thursday night, there is still an overwhelming concerns from people I've been talking to that this need for money and the referendum seem to just come out of the blue, and suddenly we are in this emergency situation and in dire need of shocking amounts of money from the taxpayers. It was stated that the district was well aware of the shortages for the last few years, and there is now an awareness that there was an inadequate job of relaying that to the public. That does not mitigate the shock for some and even the anger some are feeling about having this plea for large amounts of money dumped on them when they are already stretched thin financially. Some said that they flat out can't support the referendum, saying you can't get blood out of a turnip. Smaller increases spread out over longer time that should have started years ago would have been easier to swallow. For those that I talked to, if a referendum were to be put forth, there was not one person I spoke to that would support a recurring one. My question is, it was stated that roughly 80% of the budget goes to teacher salaries, and the other 20% was stated as non-changeable fixed expenses. Given the fact that 20% of what I think I've found out, correct me if I'm wrong, is $53,743 expenses per year, right or wrong? Wrong? No. Okay.
It's around 34, 34.6.
Let's take
the number.
Let's take 30 million. 20% of $30 million is $6 million. There are concerns about the transparency.
It's about 38%. It's about 30, we'll say 37.5.
Okay. Still, 20% of that is a large amount of money. And there's concerns about the transparency of the spending of all of that money. Can you point people to where they can view a line-by-line itemization of those expenses? And if not, is the board willing to provide that information to alleviate this concern of the people you're asking to tighten their belt?
I can answer in terms of our budget representing. It is right on our website. There's various reports that you can look at that are transparent about how we spend our money. I think when people, sometimes when they hear these large numbers, there's some assumptions that some people make, and that is that there's some misappropriation of funds, or somehow there must be something that we're missing. And I think when you are a people business, as we are, certainly the majority of our costs are going to be salary and benefits for our staff. I guess I often wonder what level of detail someone is hoping for in terms of, are there categories, are there things? So we try to represent on our website a little more detail than previously, in terms of a little more easier to understand, because I can put our budget reports up there and it's going to confuse you. It can be very confusing. So we put some graphs up on our website that we thought would be a little easier for people to understand, but it does, a budget to that extent, making it understandable to the public, can be difficult. I know Jeff Mahoney has met with many people individually to go over some of those items and questions individually so he can explain them.
Right, and so the concerns are specifically the 20%, and people are bringing up various things that they describe, in their opinion, is wasted money. It's hard to remember some of them, but one of them is something about something that's used in the gym that hangs above the basketball hoops that rarely, if ever, get used, and the cost was some exorbitant amount of money that it was a waste. But these are the concerns, is that in some people's opinions, some money is wasted, and who's to be the one to judge on whether that $500,000 or $1 million for a certain amount of equipment is really needed or not?
Hey, I can say a little bit about it. The whole group, when we first were brought together, we were kind of walked through a lot of this. We had a ton of questions that exactly like what you're asking. And so we were provided a lot of, Jeff Mahoney, the business manager, walked us through these details. And so in preparation for me stepping in for Al Rundy, I kind of looked back at a lot of this. And just to fill you in on that, so that's the 77% of the budget that goes to staff wages and benefits. That's $31 million out of about $38 million. And just looking here at some of the line items, the biggest one is transportation, and it's $1,117,000 something. Okay, a little over $1 million for transportation out of that leftover $7 million for after the 77% of staff wages and benefits. Two of the other biggest ones, over $800,000 going to substitutes. So almost $1 million, but I won't round up for us. I'll say $800,000 for substitutes. And similarly, $828,000 for utilities. And then 4K contracts, $350,000, that's another big one. So those four things together give us a little over $3 million out of the $7 million that's coming up over. And so that's leaving about $4 million for a number of things. I haven't mentioned insurance, I haven't mentioned the technology, hardware, and infrastructure. And I'm checking to see if there are any obvious other ones that I'm
and I can, I'm just pulling up on our website just to illustrate some of these things. First of all, there's a resource section here. It has our budget history, our fees, other budget information, changes in our budget, our audit report, which I think the audit report is one that a lot of people have found helpful to understand. It does take some time, but I think it can be user-friendly. We have these questions and answers on our website. There's one about how does the district spend its money, which I think is where Melanie's getting a fair amount of her information here too. But if there are specific questions, that's helpful. I'll just be really transparent. When you're talking about something in the gym, I don't have any idea what you're talking about, and I want to. I think sometimes rumors and things get started. I'll give you an example of one that really struck me. Is people say, well, sports are extra, so, just cut sports. So sports cost the district, after fees, about $400,000. And when you think about that, so it's $400,000. What I'll tell you is, in addition to the benefits that athletics provide, both to our students and to our community, there are students who would not attend school here if we didn't offer sports. It would take 38 of those students to go to another school district for us to lose that $400,000 in savings by cutting sports. So these are the difficult decisions that you have to make. Air conditioning, these are the things. And I think you make a good point, Ken, is like we're constantly making decisions about how to spend our money. And are there some decisions sometimes you make, right? Like you do at home and you make and you go, I don't know, is that worth it? Sure. And there's some that you make and go, I didn't know that was going to work out like that. I didn't know we were going to have $450,000 in interest this year. That's great. So there are challenges, and I think your point is well taken. You have to, we are in a critical time where every expense we have to analyze And I just want to assure you, as a taxpayer, that we are doing that with a sense of urgency like never before, like never before.
Aaron, if I could add just one other piece of perspective, what you were saying earlier, sir, on the on this being kind of a shock, and I think obviously, you know, this group and the board has understood that there was a lack of communication. But one of the things that I think is important to realize is that we are not alone, right? So during the April ballot, there were 93 school referendums across the state. And so asking for a variety of different things. Some were referendums for operating, some were for capital. But the one overarching thing that is true of all this is that, in my opinion, and probably maybe some other folks, is we're dealing with a broken system, right? And so it is unfortunate that it was kind of a shock to some folks that there was a referendum and that wasn't understood by a lot of people, but this has been a massive problem. And these referendums keep coming up and coming up all across the state because of this broken system.
I guess I just want to add, you know, Aaron said, I have no idea what you're talking about at this basketball thing. So I would just really encourage people that if you hear something out there and it seems like it's not true or you don't have the information, please email Aaron and get the correct and appropriate information. Because as Ken said, there was a lot of incorrect and false information that has been circling around. I can tell you that I have emailed Aaron many, many questions, and he usually gets back to me very promptly and has the accurate information. And I think the biggest goal right now is to make sure we have accurate and correct information out there versus these stories that nobody knows what they're talking about, and then it just goes like a game of telephone, and it's really toxic, and it's affecting our schools.
One thing I'll say, just to get a little bit political, is that in actuality, you already paid for this referendum. You paid your taxes, and there's a surplus. And with the COVID relief money, it reduced your school-related taxes, and that was great for the taxpayer. And the district was pleased to be able to see that happen. We honestly anticipated that the state would be increasing that revenue cap, that per pupil spending, to account for the federal dollars being gone and the ability for the state to increase the surplus. You know, and maybe that was unrealistic, you know, on our part. Clearly it was. But the truth is that there is money that has already been paid by the taxpayer to the state that could be provided to school districts, so that 423 of us school districts, 90 some going to referendum just in April, aren't having to go to the taxpayer and ask for additional funds. So whether, you know, that's appropriate for me to say or not, it's the truth as far as I see it, and as far as what you have said. I hear this often. Well, why don't you do more to get the state? I'll tell you, the state is not listening to me as a superintendent. There's not a concern from my perspective. They listen to the voters. That's who they listen to, and I'm one vote. So just, you know, keep that in mind, and I'm with you. And just for the people at home, I think it's really important to hear what Ken said, as he said, you know, that he wants to make sure that people vote with competence, that they have the information they need to make an informed decision. And I think that is why we're here tonight, right? And why we're going to continue to talk and answer questions. Very well said.
And I'm just going to add one little data point that, you know, I talked about how the two ways to raise that revenue cap are referendum and inflationary adjustments. And the state did just make an inflationary adjustment of $325 per student. And that's pretty significant. I told you our minimum wage for school district funding is $11,000, but we're at about $12,000. Well, that bumps us up another $325. And that's significant because out of the last 10 years, 6 of those years, there has been a $0 adjustment for inflation. And the other years, it was still inadequate, a smaller amount, like in the around 100, or I think none of them hit 200. And Jeff Mahoney explains that if we had an inflationary adjustment of $325 for the past 4 years, we wouldn't need to be doing this. So those adjustments really make a difference too.
They do, and again, back to this chart that really illustrates that gap over time and how it's grown. Other questions?
So I have a couple questions and comments, but I'll make it quick. So since the referendum failed, are you aware of new money like you just spoke about? Is that like $1 million that the district is going to get that they weren't planning on?
So I don't know if you're talking about the state aid. There is $1 million in state aid that's an estimate that just came out in July. And Aaron, you can correct me on any of this, but I'll give it my best stab. The state sort of declares an amount of state aid for school districts in October, but in July they give an estimate. And the estimate in July is that it would increase by about $1 million. And that $1 million, you have to understand, again, the state aid does not increase the cap on revenue. It doesn't close that gap between what we have right now, what we can get from property taxes and state aid combined, to close the gap to our actual expenses when you count for inflation. So that was that $100, and I don't think I made that clear, but the estimate is that, and you can talk about what you will, but the estimate at this time is that we will get that state aid, and it will impact our property taxes, and that come October, we're gonna find out that our taxes will actually go down by about $100. Again, not a guarantee, we'll know the number in October. But the district is really hesitant to say too much about that, and I'm gonna just kind of let you.
Yes, so excellent question. So at the start of July, the districts receive an estimate of our state aid. So you get some number. We had estimated that we'd have about a $330,000 increase in state aid for this coming year, and it's estimated to be $1 million, which is great. We don't feel, and the state is very clear, they say this is an estimate, don't count on this. We don't feel that it would be fair to the taxpayer to assume that that is accurate. So let's say we go out and say, okay, yeah, we're gonna go with that $1 million, which means your tax burden goes down. Again, it doesn't increase our revenue, it just reduces the tax burden. More state aid, less tax, okay? So we come out and we say, each of these options that we showed you are actually $100 less only in that first year, right? Because the state aid would just be for that first year. Each of these is gonna be $100 less. October comes and the state says, whoops, actually, we told you our estimate might change and it's not that much. If we did that, then we'd be coming back to you saying, it's actually gonna be more. We would much rather have a conservative estimate on state aid and bring forth the numbers that we think, frankly, is a worst case scenario so that you can plan for that and that you're making that decision. Now, if it comes October and it is that $1 million, we can come and say, great news, there's been some tax relief because our state aid is higher. So your taxes are going to go down by this amount, and for these options, it would mean this much. So I hope that makes sense. I think we just can't take a chance that those numbers could actually be inaccurate and there's less state aid. That would be awful.
So just to summarize, it's good news for the taxpayer, it's no news for the schools. And so it doesn't impact at all their need to raise the cap and go to referendum.
The $325 per student that was raised for this past year and is planned to be raised for eternity, according to the governor's veto, that could change, right? That's being negotiated moving forward, and certainly that does help, and that is factored into our calculations, that $325. You're also paying for that. However, it's not money from the surplus. It is a cost.
So that just reinforces my concern about the reoccurring format, is that there's so much unknown, especially in the political climate in Wisconsin right now, and school funding. I mean, we are hopeful that with some changes coming up with the district lines, that maybe there will be some positive change in our funding. And so to have perpetuity, I just can't go for that, you know? And so just like you ended up on this kind of cliff because of unknown, you know, you kind of saw it coming, but you were hopeful. I'm kind of that same way. I see positive coming, and I'm hopeful that I'm like willing to kind of help get us through maybe 3 years if it doesn't come through, but perpetuity, I'm not buying into at this point. And that's what I want to express to you.
Thank you.
The other comment I have is more about, I went to the information meetings, an information meeting prior to the referendum. There was a lot of information, well, not information, a lot of posting on the community page, and people really digging in and trying to figure out numbers and all this stuff, but really about cutting expenses, and we've heard it here, by suggestions. And I think in this community, there are a lot of professionals with background, and a lot of people have great ideas, because cutting expenses lots of times go across industry. You know, your approach can be cross industry lines, and maybe, you know, what worked, what you never thought about in teaching and education, you know, but it applied in healthcare, maybe it does cross. I don't know. But I think the opportunity to maybe give community members to volunteer, to somehow have an expense reduction for that 30%, the 8 million, whatever, to at least express their ideas and have you consider some of these, because even you put up there 49,000 because, you know, administrators didn't take a pay increase. 49,000, it's still $49,000. So even though these savings might be under $100,000, they can add up.
Certainly.
So that's my other comment.
Thank you so much. Yes, we're always happy to take ideas. Oh, Megan's going to add.
I am going to add. So I have a couple of comments about, we've heard the recurring and non-recurring a couple of times. And I want to say from a school board member perspective, and I'm only talking for myself and my fellow board members, I have to marry the responsibility to the taxpayer and also to the public education, right? And so for me, I feel like it is both equally fiscally irresponsible to put a referendum question on the November ballot that isn't going to pass. It's because that's not, if it's something that doesn't work for the taxpayer, it doesn't make sense to put it on there. For our schools, it is fiscally irresponsible to put something on there that is not recurring. Because as you said, we have a lot of hope that things will change, but we don't know that for sure. So in that sense, as a board member, I also have to think about setting up the school district and our public education to support that. Now, what I would also like to point out, though, and I don't know if it's been mentioned yet, but historically, when the revenue cap has been increased for McFarland, and we get new information where we don't need, where we don't have as high of expenses or enrollment changes, or we don't need all of that revenue cap, we don't ask for the maximum. We always ask for just what we need. And so while we might ask for more and it might be recurring, we might not always take it. And I think that's an important thing to remember and to think about, that that's also an option. You know, even though we're asking for, considering options, whatever, getting the information for what might be possible, it might not be what has to happen as we learn more information. So it's balancing, it's that same sweet spot that everyone keeps talking about. It's the needs of the district and public education and what that provides for a community and for what the community can support.
Something to mention too from an employer perspective, I work with organizations across the country in all time zones, unfortunately. Sometimes I'm up late on Pacific time calls, but when you have, as an employer, when you are an employer that has revenue that is volatile and isn't expected over time, you have increased turnover or attrition because staff don't feel confident that their job may be there the next year. So sales is a really good example of this. I've worked with a lot of organizations with mergers and acquisitions, and when there is uncertainty about the end goal or the end state of an organization, you oftentimes see an increase in turnover or attrition. Turnover or attrition in general industry hovering around 15% is something that we feel confident in, means that, you know, it's stable. Anything above that is significantly volatile, in which you have significant employee recruitment costs that then become a fiscal line item in your budget that you just have to absorb. So from an employee perspective, and I'm not a teacher, but we probably will see, if a non-recurring is passed, we will probably still see an increase in attrition or turnover as a result of staff not knowing what will happen after that after that referendum ends. So usually, probably that last year, people are going to get antsy and they don't know what's going to happen, so they're going to find a new job. Like I said, it costs 150% of someone's salary to find a replacement. So we will see increased costs in the salary space just to maintain whoever stays. And Kelly mentioned too, when you build relationships, you might really hemorrhage staff if you have one person leave. That domino effect really does occur.
I guess I'll just add, I can understand the recurring versus non-reoccurring, but I also want to make it very clear, and just like Caitlin said, is that last year when our staff are worried that they're not going to have a job next year, we're probably going to come back to the taxpayers and ask for another referendum if all of those things that you suggested don't happen. And so I just want to be very clear that we do hear you on that, but we also, I'm hesitant to be asked as a taxpayer again in 3 years for more money when we just had a referendum. So just something to think about. So I want you to know that we hear you on that, and a lot of us have thought through that many conversations.
And as Caitlin said, that's sort of one of the ripple effects that, as a teacher, I'm a little worried about, is if some of our teachers are feeling not job secure, or that there's that constant unsureness, that they'll look elsewhere for a job. And as a taxpayer myself, I think there's probably an assumption that, well, of course, teachers are for the referendum. It was a tough, it's tough for me too. I am getting close to where I can retire, like pretty close. I'm not saying it's going to happen because I have a kid in college, so there's that. I'm trying to start to think about what that might look like, and I know that that was a message that was clear for people who are retired on fixed income, that was a really big ask. So I personally understand that from my own perspective as to where I am in my career and in life. So,
thank you.
Does anybody else want to? I just wanted to add to some of these thoughts because I do think it's a really tough call about recurring versus non-recurring. My first impulse is to think that recurring, sorry, I just feel like I can't see you guys over here, that recurring is, it's kind of like Megan said, it's more responsible, it's more stable, it allows for planning, and I think that prices don't tend to go down. So this the graph's not there anymore, but so we have to hope that the state would act in between. But I have to say, I think part of the magic of this school district is probably the retention. I've tried to figure out what's going on because it is really rare, I would think, that a school with some of the lowest funding would have the second highest ranking. And so I puzzle over a little bit, like, how is that possible? Where does that come from? And as somebody who's not in the classroom right now, I peek at the job listings here and there and go, oh, look, there's openings there, and I didn't know the 95% until I joined this group, but there are not a lot of jobs posted here in McFarland, and living here, I feel those relationships, and I can only imagine the camaraderie that is experienced in the classroom. And so I know that when you're thinking about your dollars, that camaraderie doesn't mean something to you, but I guess what I'm saying is when you are very limited on resources, you have to remember teaching is a hard job. And teachers tend to be very intrinsically motivated. I mean, they will go above and beyond their contract hours and do routinely because their heart is in it. And they know that in order for this child to learn, they're going to need to build a relationship with that child and that child's family, and that's the part that feels so good. That's why you're there. And when your colleagues start to go somewhere else, those are not just professional resources, they're also resources for your own morale. And so I just going back to the recurring and non-recurring, I do find myself going like, gosh, whatever we can do to maintain retention and not put a crack in that retention might be a wise choice. And so maybe, we saw 50-50 are considering the lowest option. Maybe going to non-recurring, if that can increase the staff retention in any number of ways, then maybe that's the ticket to the district maintaining their quality of education while also finding that sweet spot with the community. So.
I appreciate that. It's a good discussion, and I think you speak for many, having read comments and many conversations that people are concerned about the idea of a recurring.
I just want to say that I think the information that's been presented in the three options, it takes us out to 2028, right? And that's the number that we're looking at. You can compare the three options in that year. That's as far. So the idea of recurring then, what happens if we're to 2035? I mean, what does that number look like? It doesn't concern me personally that much. I mean, because when I think about it, except for things like gasoline, which the prices can fluctuate depending on what the market bears, but who's able to buy a car now for anywhere near what they could buy a car 10 years ago, And so I understand that the cost of operating, we all kind of expect progress in our salaries. You know, most professions don't look at earning less this year than they earned 10 years ago or go out 10 years. So, I mean, it is just sort of expected that things do go up. But anyway, that idea of recurring, I think, certainly isn't quite clear to some people. I don't know. I mean, the gentleman that spoke over here about the concern of it's just too much. You know, that's been brought up several times, that it's just too much to think about what life would look like if we go out 10 years instead of 4 years. But, you know, I think that's kind of the reality. Is that what we're talking about, though, that it would keep going up by that much forever and ever and ever?
So the way, let me see if I can explain this as well. So it keeps building until that last year, that in this case year 4, and then it would stay at that increase. So if it's 1554, it would stay at 1554 after that. It doesn't keep going up after that, right? But that increase, yeah, 1554 would be the, you know, 2029, 2030. That's what a recurring does. What a non-recurring does is it gets built up to that 1554, and then that just falls off. Yeah, just like the COVID funds, right. So I think it's 6.4 million in option 1. So that would allow us to exceed the revenue cap by 6.4 million by that 4th year. And then in a non-recurring, that 6.4 million drops off. So there's that fiscal cliff is what we call it.
I think another element to this, and I had a conversation with somebody who is an older citizen, you know, lives in their own home, owns it free and clear, bought it 30 to 40 years ago at a much lower price than what it's worth now. And there are people who the value, you know, as our property assessment keeps going up, that also, like we're talking about a $400,000 average price home in the community. But there are a lot of homes in this community that cost a lot more. And if you live on the lake shore, for example, you may be talking about a $2 million property, which you own, but the taxes are, you know, astronomical. And so when we're talking about adding $1,500 to that tax base every year, that really, I mean, I was just blown away to think about that, you know, because I probably live in an average price home, so it doesn't seem like it's out of reach. But for older.
4th year, though. It's not.
I know.
Okay.
But if you're paying $20,000 a year in property tax already because your house is worth that much, even though what you bought it for, you know, wasn't so much. So I think when we're talking about the older population, you know, that's where they're kind of looking at trying to manage their fixed income, even though, I mean, you know, that's an asset that if you own property on the lake shore,
Certainly.
it's a great asset. You know, that
Certainly.
You could liquidate, but you don't want to.
Aaron, just to clarify, all of the options and the estimated cost increase over the 4 years are also adjusting the property value of that house. So it starts at $400,000 and then increases based on forecasting for that next year and that next, right? It's not just keeping that house static at that property value?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. All of the options factor in a 7% increase in value. And of course, equalized value, the way that works with your taxes is if everybody's property value goes up the same amount, you don't pay any more, because, right, you're not getting more, it's just a distribution model. But if yours goes up 9%, somebody else goes up 7%, you're going to pay more than the person that has 7%, a larger portion of the overall tax levy.
I would like to mention too, and I don't have a piece of data in front of me that I can quote or speak to specifically, but good schools raise property values significantly and decrease crime rates, and there is a whole slew of positive impacts that a good school has on a community, aside from having well-educated people that then are Olympians or become the nurse at the ER or our teacher here right next to me, right? So there's a lot of good things that happen with a good school, and property value increase is definitely one of those things. I would ask the question the other way, though. What happens when the school doesn't have the second highest report card in Dane County? What happens when we don't have the extracurricular programs that our community needs and wants? What happens then? What happens to crime rate? there are strong and direct correlations to negative impacts to a community when there is not a past referendum and there isn't sufficient funding to do the things that it needs to do. I don't have a piece of data to support. I've read lots of articles and peer-reviewed publications, but I think we should challenge ourselves as a community to think about the negative what if and what that's going to mean for my kids and my grandkids and my neighbor girl down the street who needs a little bit more than my kids do even today. The education as an institution within our society is just kind of a fundamental ideology that we have as the United States and of the McFarland community. And I really want to challenge us to think about what happens if we undermine that for potentially our own benefit as the taxpayer. I really struggle with that. As my property taxes continue to increase too, what if we don't? Is the question I would ask.
All right, any more questions? It's just a little bit past 8, so thanks for sticking around. You're welcome to leave if you need to.
Hey, Aaron, could I just say a really quick thing?
Yeah.
I just want to say it occurred to me to say this because I feel like there have been a lot of great questions here, and I figured I was at first going to be speaking for myself, but I'm probably not. I really, really appreciate the people who came and the people who are listening online who are engaging in this. Like, no matter what direction you come from, thank you so much for asking your questions and taking the time to learn and reach out, because that's the answer to any of it, no matter where we wind up. So that's it.
Yeah, I don't think it's characteristic of most communities. All right, we have another question.
It's more of a comment.
A comment?
I would just like to state a little more strongly and directly something that many of you have hinted at. Funding for education in Wisconsin has been designed very intentionally by people in the state legislature to break education, because those people do not believe in public education. I know you can't say that, but I'll say it, because it's true. If your ire is raised by that, if you're understandably upset that your taxes go up as a result of that, focus that ire on those members of the state legislature who are breaking the system, not on the kids who go to school here. And I say that as someone who no longer has kids in the district. That's all.
Thank you.
So I'm going to say my name. No one did, but I think it's important to my comments. So I'm Carolyn Clow, and I'm the village president. And thanks for leading the perfect segue into what I was going to say. I am hurt by the way that this conversation has been hurting our community. And the system is set up for us to be here arm wrestling with each other over whether the school district should have money or the village should have money or the county should have money, and to put citizens who get up every day and go to work and work very hard for the money that they have and have to make family budget decisions about where that money goes. And so so thank you for saying that. And I think we should understand that as sort of the level, the basis from which we have our conversations, that we were set up to fight with each other about these conversations. And as I hear people attack our school administration and staff, my heart breaks a little bit. As I hear people make comments in the public about, misappropriation of funds and the school district was hiding, my heart breaks a little bit more. We have an amazing school administration and school staff. Do we have a perfect school administration and school staff? We do not. We have 5 people who ran for and chose to serve on the school board who come in every day and try to represent the community as best that they possibly can, and we all elected them, and I applaud them as well. School finance of all kinds, is very, very, very complicated, and as you've heard, people sitting up here who care very much about the district and care very much about our schools and also have to balance their budgets and send their kids to school, it's tough. And all of the decisions that the school board has made, whether I personally went to the school board meeting or not, were made in public meeting. The meetings are recorded. The information has been out on the website for years and years and years and years. And we came in 2005 to send 3 kids to school because they needed a different school. And that's our story, our family story. It's always been our family's story. And so what I really, really, really hope that this community can do around this referendum is, one, to care about our community. Bruce Fisher said something from, I think you said, Claire Mikowski, McFarland is a special place. McFarland is a special place, sure, because of the schools, and he got told that in the context of that school, but McFarland is a special place because McFarland is a special place, and that's why we love it. And when we find ways to work together and figure out what the best paths are for our community, that's how we find ways. And so I want to thank the school administration. I want to thank the school staff that gets up every day and looks after our kids and has forever. They looked after our kids. I have grandkids in the district, and I appreciate and love this school. And I want to speak for people trusting in the institutions that we have and believing that the ideas that are being put forth are the best ideas that can be put forth in the system that we have to put them forth. At the end of the day, the school board gets to make a decision to put one referendum question on the ballot, worded in the best way they can figure out as they work towards that meeting. Why does it have to be set by August 27th? Because that's the deadline to submit it to the state, to have the ballots properly printed so that we can all have them. Might they want more time? Might there be a better way to write the question? Might there be a half answer, quarter answer, this, that, and the other? Might the state change the funding? Yep. Just yep, that's the answer. All of those things could. And 5 people from our community will have to decide on a question to go on that ballot. They will do their best, listening to everyone that they can, and we will support it to the best that we can. And I thank you all for being on the school board and for setting that question, and I thank you as administration for setting it up. And I hope that the community will look at the question and look at their interactions with the other people in their community and their requests for information in that light.
Thank you.
I forgot that I was going to say something, but thank you for saying that, Carolyn. That was very kind. And the last thing that I would say, kind of in reference to your comments about the system being broken, you know, the board recognized that, and we've put things in place to try to put ourselves in a better position. We now have a legislative liaison as a board role to try to help get the system fixed, at least get our voice heard. There's a Dane County consortium, basically, of school districts that are coming together and advocacy at the state level is part of that. And I think we haven't mentioned that before in these meetings. So I wanted to make sure that we recognize that it's a broken system and we have some options to be able to help change it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or final thoughts? Teacher wait time. See?
So I'm going to ask what we can do as a community to help get the referendum passed in whatever form it is. Because as my husband said, we don't have kids in the district, but I have lived in the district for all of my 51 years. I went here for K through 12. We lived up in the Twin Cities, and I moved back here to raise my children in this school district. And I want it to succeed. And I know it can't without funding. And this is what makes the community great. And so no matter which role we decide to go forward with this referendum, how do we get community members to understand the importance and the relative insignificance of the dollars? Because I think if you start looking at it as it's less than 0.375% of your house value, it's insignificant. And I know when people look at $1,500, they think that's a lot of money, but when you say it's $1 a day, I mean, you spend more than that at Starbucks. You spend more than that, you know, on your Netflix subscription. There's other ways you could save money. And frankly, there's an election in November that people can hopefully vote to change the way our government is run, so that people who have lots of money pay taxes and those who don't pay less, right? But, you know, in short, how do we work as a community to get it supported? And I guess I would hope that if we can come back with some concrete ideas to help get the word out more, to make it important to people, to understand that it is the value of their home, it is the importance in our community. What we can do to help would be great.
Hi. So, I love this question because I love this topic. I think the number one thing that you can do is just have conversations with people, right? And to say things when you see people or hear people talking about it. I think one of our biggest challenges in the spring was a lot of the misinformation. And once it started rolling, it snowballed and it got out of control. And I think we reached a point, well, you know, I would say around spring break was probably the breaking point at that point, that there was just no return, right, from what happened. And so now this time, I think we all have a lot more information. We know a lot more things. The district has been involving the community more. And so just to talk to people and then get the word out. So like tell people about things like, tonight, this isn't going to be the last of these. Like there are going to be other information sessions. The PTO has one scheduled in October already about the referendum. So encouraging people to learn factual information. Give them the school website. You'll keep your eye out for like community groups that are active that want to do this. Put a sign in your yard. Go have food truck night. If you hear someone say something, say something. And just be involved and talk about what this means to you on a personal level. Because these individual conversations that we have with people have a far more reaching impact than the like 6 of us sitting up here on a stage, right? You know your neighbors. You know what they need to hear. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that the value and like the school board doing the office hours kind of thing, you know, social media is a far imperfect way to have conversations about complex, nuanced issues. And I think those personal conversations with neighbors, with, reaching out to Aaron or the school board via email, I would imagine many of us are happy to chat or whatever. I think those personal conversations are so much more effective than not speaking to people face to face. It makes a huge difference. Again, it's relationships.
One last thing to note, too, when we're talking about the referendum, if there is a potential referendum in November, this is a presidential election, so we're going to see a significantly higher turnout than we did in April, just because of the two names that we'll see on the ticket that we're all going to recognize. So I think part of politics is making sure that you have that informed voter base with factual information. We're going to have a lot more of them than we did in April, just because it's a presidential election. So not only is it, people are going to vote this time more than April, and we just want them to be informed and armed with the information that they need, like Ken said, to make a competent decision, as opposed to just guessing as to what to vote for. So I think that we just need to emphasize that our voter turnout is going to be very high, regardless of who you're selecting. We just want to make sure that all of those people who show up have an idea about, is it yes or is it no, if that comes to the ballot.
One other quick note, this has been recorded, right? So if you want to share, tell people about, hey, I went to this really cool thing and we learned a lot of stuff, and share that recording. Cut and paste that URL, send it to friends, right? It's right there for them.
And I was just going to add that, if only 30% of McFarland has kids in the schools, then those conversations that are being had, like if you don't have kids in the schools anymore, but it's compelling to you that the schools have value to you and to the community, even without having your own children in them anymore. I think that the conversations that dwell on why are really important.
And I think I'll just add, and I mentioned it briefly, is combating the misinformation in the community. If you've been to the website, there's a Q&A that Aaron is constantly updating with factual data as he gets questions. So again, if something seems a little off and you're not sure and you don't know how to answer it, please email Aaron or contact the school board members or get the information. Look on the website, try to find the accurate information.
Yeah, I love to update it, so I don't know. It's really fun to have a question and be able to put out an answer that you can then share with others. Anything else? Well, we've talked about McFarland being special a lot, and I think this is proof of it. The level of engagement in this community right now is special. It is unique. I talk to my superintendent friends, and it is not like that in their districts. You're listening, you want to be informed, you want to be engaged, you're willing to say things. Sometimes they're hard to say. You're willing to ask questions, or you're not even sure what you're asking sometimes. It's powerful. And so let's keep this level of engagement. Please reach out to our board members, reach out to me with your questions. Please fill out that exit slip. Those results are what will be shared with our referendum engagement committee. So whether you fill it out online or you fill it out here, it's one additional thing beyond that survey to gather your feedback. They're going to review that information. They're going to present to the school board on August 5th, and then we'll see where things go from there. You're always welcome at our school board meetings. We'd love to have you join us. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your evening. Go Spartans.